Confession: I had a breakthrough in therapy today, and no one to share it with, which feels both liberating and lonely at the same time. It's hard to explain how I've reached this point in my life, a jumble of emotions and experiences I've kept bottled up for so long. I suppose you could say I'm a bit of a recluse. Most of my friendships faded away in college, not out of malice, but simply because I became so consumed with my thoughts, my anxieties about my future, that I let everyone drift away as I shut myself in. Relying on a steady stream of self-help books and online forums, I found comfort in reaching out to strangers who felt similar, but still, it was never quite enough. Then I found Julia, my therapist, whose calming presence made me feel safe enough to explore the corners of my mind I had buried deeply. It was in her cozy office, with its warm light glowing softly from vintage lamps and the scent of peppermint tea wafting through the air, where I finally confronted my fears head-on. Today, we delved into a nefarious shadow from my past, a moment I had brushed aside for years. I recalled the day my father left, how it felt like the earth had shifted beneath my feet. I had always believed that his departure was simply a matter of his choices, but now, sitting across from Julia, I began to understand the weight it truly carried. I felt a surge of anger rise up in me, not only for him but for myself as well. I hadn't allowed myself to be angry, instead opting for a passive acceptance that rotted away at my soul. As I articulated these feelings, I felt like a burden was lifting. Julia encouraged me to lean into that anger, to give it a voice, and when it finally erupted, the emotional jagged edges smoothed out into tears I didn't know I had left. It was cathartic, and I found myself laughing amidst the tears, a wild mix of emotions rushing through me. I could hardly believe it. Was this what clarity felt like? As the session wrapped up, I felt lighter, liberated even. But leaving her office, a bittersweet emptiness settled in my chest. Who would I tell? My mother, who never really understood how much the divorce had affected me, would likely brush it aside with a wave of her hand and say I should just let it go. My high school friends? They've started families and built careers while I still wrestle with my identity. I felt like a specter in my own life, standing at the periphery of everyone else's bright reality. I walked home, the weight of my revelation lingering in the air, but no one to share it with. The muted hum of the city felt distant and cold, every building towering over me as if they were guardians keeping secrets I longed to uncover. Once inside, I sat on my bed, letting a blanket wrap around me like a cocoon, the world outside fading away. I took out my journal, a paper-bound space where I had chronicled my darker nights and heavier thoughts, and began to write. My pen skimmed across the pages, recounting today's breakthrough, intricately relaying the details, as if talking to an unseen friend. I wrote about the anger that had bubbled to the surface, the laughter amidst tears, the sheer relief of letting down my guard. It felt both exhilarating and disheartening to not have someone to hear my story, to celebrate this new chapter with me. But in this quiet moment, I embraced the gift of self-reflection. The taut string of vulnerability frayed, and I realized that even in isolation, there's strength in my journey of self-discovery. Maybe I didn't need to rush out and share. Perhaps the most important relationship I needed to nurture was the one with myself. As I turned off the bedside lamp and closed my journal, I felt a flicker of hope, a gentle warmth spreading through me. Maybe tomorrow I'd find the courage to reach out, not just to anyone, but to those who would understand. I drifted off to sleep, embracing the quiet power of my confession, knowing that each step forward, even in solitude, was still a step toward freedom. Update: a week later, I decided to share my experience with a close cousin I hadn't spoken to in ages. Surprisingly, she responded with empathy, recounting her own struggles with unresolved family issues. It opened a door I thought was permanently shut, and for the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't alone on this journey. We've started connecting regularly, sharing our stories while learning from each other. Sometimes, even the simplest of breakthroughs can spark a ripple of understanding. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself looking forward to these conversations with my cousin, Jessica. The familiarity of our childhood memories mixed with the weight of our shared struggles created a unique bond, one I hadn't expected to nurture at this stage in my life. Our talks often drifted from nostalgia to deeper subjects, dissecting our family dynamics and the emotional baggage we both carried. I had always viewed my family as this monolithic entity, untouchable and imposing, like an intricate tapestry woven so tightly that any alteration seemed impossible. Jessica's willingness to peel back the layers of her own experiences, however, revealed a shared narrative of feeling trapped beneath the expectations and disappointments that overshadowed our upbringing. One evening, as the sunlight dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, I found myself laying everything bare. I spoke of my breakthrough in therapy, the surreal release I felt after confessing my fears and insecurities. I recounted how voicing those once silenced thoughts felt like chipping away at the stone wall I had built around my heart. Jessica listened intently, prompting me with questions that led me deeper into my own psyche while freely sharing her own experiences. Hearing her story about losing her sense of self amidst the chaos of our family's unresolved tension was both heart-wrenching and cathartic. It made me realize just how intertwined our lives were, despite the physical distance and emotional walls we had constructed over the years. Our discussions often transformed into moments of soul-searching. We explored the intricate dance of resentment and love that our parents seemed to project onto us, breaking down our childhoods into poignant memories of both joy and sorrow. I often found myself reflecting on how many bridges I had burned in my search for independence and recognition, bridges that now, through our conversations, felt worthy of mending. Silence would sometimes fall between us, but it was comfortable, almost reassuring, like we were both allowing the weight of our confessions to settle gently. Yet, despite the comfort of renewed connection, I couldn't shake a lingering dread. I had shared pieces of myself with Jessica, but what if my newfound vulnerability revealed too much? What if I evolved and grew beyond the familial ties that had once felt so suffocating? These thoughts gnarled like twisted vines in my mind, and as the anxiety simmered, I realized that my breakthrough was much more profound than I had anticipated. It wasn't merely about me stepping into the light, it was also about redefining the connections I had taken for granted. I hadn't just revealed my truths to Jessica, I was also challenging her to do the same, to reshape our family narrative from one of isolation to one of solidarity. One afternoon, we met for coffee at a quaint little cafe that was a favorite spot of ours when we were kids. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapped around us like a warm embrace. I looked at her, the gentle curve of her smile, the way her eyes sparkled as she spoke passionately about her new perspective on growth, and realization dawned on me, this wasn't merely about confiding in each other, it was about healing together. The fraught histories we carried were not burdens to bear alone but strands of a collective experience that needed to be untangled. That day, we made a pact, one of intention and continued openness. We agreed to delve deeper into our shared histories, promising to approach our next family gatherings not with apprehension but with a newfound strength that stemmed from our conversations. As we left the cafe, I felt buoyed by the sense of community we had resurrected. I understood now that my breakthrough in therapy had unfolded into something larger, something that invited an openness not only within me but in the relationships that mattered. I still had my moments of doubt, but they felt lighter somehow, tempered by the knowledge that I was no longer traversing this journey in isolation. Sometimes, the most profound transformation comes not just from within, but from the bonds we rebuild and the stories we choose to revisit, reframe, and share as we all walk towards our own kind of freedom. As the weeks stretched into months, the dialogue with my cousin deepened in unexpected ways, illuminating the shared shadows we had carried for far too long. Our evening calls became sacred, a ritual of honesty cloaked in laughter and tears. We spoke not just of past hurts but of our aspirations, our fears, and the haunting intricacies of our family dynamics that had once felt too heavy to discuss. I could feel the weight of generations loosening its grip, as if our confessions acted as an unknotted thread, allowing light to filter through the fractures. There was something comforting about hearing her voice, punctuated by moments of understanding that needed no words. We reveled in the joy of knowing we had someone to lean on, a partner in this quest for healing. One evening, as rain tapped gently against my window, I found myself unloading the gravity of my fears about my parents, about the silent expectations they held and the angst that tinged our family gatherings. My cousin listened intently, her silence a soft anchor amidst my turmoil. She confessed her own struggles with the weight of her parents' unresolved conflicts, the way they had often used her as a messenger rather than a daughter, caught in the crossfire of their unspoken grievances. The way she recounted her experience made me feel as though we were two sailors, navigating the unpredictable sea of childhood memories. In those conversations, I learned that vulnerability was a powerful gift we could give each other, a way to weave our distinct threads into a richer tapestry. Sharing our tales became a shared language, a form of healing where we could finally articulate the pain I'd spent so long burying beneath layers of avoidance. Even as I learned to speak my truth aloud, I found there were still threads left unspoken, nuances of our upbringing that lingered just below the surface. One night, fueled by that familiar mixture of comfort and courage, I dared to divulge a childhood memory that I had long locked away. The afternoon I discovered my parents arguing, words like daggers slicing through the air, shattering my innocence. As I recounted it, I felt tears spill, but they were different this time. They felt cleansing, healing, as though each drop rinsed away an old weight. My cousin empathized, sharing a similar moment from her youth, and in those shared truths, we found solace in the realization that we were not alone in our suffering. There was power in our pain, a kinship forged in understanding, and it sparked something new between us. Gradually, as I opened these floodgates of honesty not just with my cousin but with others, I noticed the threads of my life becoming richer, more vibrant, woven together with sincere connections. A few weeks later, emboldened by the sense of community we had constructed, I took the plunge and invited my cousin to a family gathering. The thought had once filled me with dread, inkling memories of discomfort and judgment, but this time felt different. I was no longer standing on the periphery as the fearful child I once was. As the gathering approached, I prepared myself for the tumultuous waters of family dynamics. My cousin arrived, and as we exchanged casual greetings with our relatives, I felt a sense of calmness settle over me. There was a warmth in the sharing of laughter and stories, a feeling of returning home. When those old family tensions emerged, I caught my cousin's eye, and her reassuring nod reminded me that I wasn't alone in the chaos. With each shared glance, we forged our own fortress of solidarity, empowering one another to speak up when old patterns threatened to overshadow this moment of connection. That night, as I lay awake recalling the evening, I realized that my breakthrough had transformed not only my internal world but also the relationships around me. A vibrant sense of empathy blossomed, inviting healing into spaces that had once felt impenetrable. I thought of how simple it had been to reach out, how the act of sharing had sparked an illumination in the dark corners of my heart. Reflecting on it all, I recognized that a real breakthrough isn't just a moment of personal revelation, it's an invitation to cultivate deeper connections, embracing the profound simplicity of shared honesty. My cousin and I had not only found a bridge over our individual struggles, but we had also rekindled the flame of familial love, showing that sometimes, the path to freedom is illuminated by the stories we dare to share. As I closed my eyes, I felt a profound sense of gratitude envelop me, knowing that those shared tales of vulnerability were not just acts of bravery, they were the beacons guiding us toward healing and connection. And for that, I knew I would always cherish my journey, no matter how winding it may be. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat alone at my desk, the soft click of my computer keys breaking the stillness of the late afternoon. There was a flicker of a notification on my screen, a question that had been posted to Ask Reddit, asking what topic one would choose to give a 1-hour informative speech about for $10,000 if they had no choice but to do so right then and there. The absurdity of it sparked a flicker of excitement. What if I really had to speak in front of a crowd? I found myself imagining various topics flickering through my mind. As a teacher, I had the privilege of learning alongside my students, unraveling the mysteries of the world through our discussions. My stature as a seasoned educator shifted somewhere deep within me as I fought the creeping anxiety at the thought of standing before a crowd, my heart racing at the idea of being thrust into the spotlight. After a brief moment of considering the daunting task, I settled on something that had always lingered in the background of my passions, the significance of storytelling through community history. It was a topic close to my heart, woven into the threads of my own life. I began to visualize the faces of the community members I knew, rich in stories yet unchronicled, the small-town narratives that rarely found a place in textbooks, the tales of resilience, heartbreak, and triumph shared over coffee and pie at the local diner. But as I settled into my daydream of an eager crowd nodding respectfully at my passionate presentation, a sudden shift occurred. The hum in the room became punctuated by an abrupt voice. "You have to give a speech right now." The words echoed in my mind for a moment, and I looked up, convinced I was imagining things. But the stern figure in front of me was real, a classmate from college, Mike, who had always been an extroverted whirlwind, charismatic in a way I envied. "You said you could talk about anything. This is your chance to show what you've got. $10,000. He persisted, eyes wide with an infectious enthusiasm that I couldn't quite resist. The mixture of disbelief, amusement, and an adrenaline surge washed over me. In an instant, I found my mind racing with the knowledge I wanted to impart. As I stood, I felt a familiar heaviness settle in my chest, the nagging fear of public speaking, the memories of stumbling over my words in past endeavors washed over me like waves. Yet, I breathed in deeply, and the anticipation of the unexpected opportunity compelled me forward, my feet moving before my mind could intervene. Mike led me toward an impromptu gathering of colleagues in the next conference room. My heart thudded against my ribs, a metronome marking each passing second as I gathered my thoughts amidst the friendly jabs and encouraging nods from familiar faces. Once I reached the front of the makeshift room, I paused, glancing across the assortment of eager eyes. I noticed a few raised eyebrows and smirks. But there was also a palpable curiosity. I took a deep breath, my voice hiccuping at first as I began to speak about community storytelling, the importance of listening, archiving, and sharing our histories. Each word that slipped from my lips grew more confident as I dove deeper into how weaving together the fabric of a community helps nurture connections. With each anecdote shared, I saw nods of understanding and glimpses of recognition. It became more than just a speech, it was a dialogue that blossomed into a shared experience, reminding me of those conversations that punctuated our everyday lives. As I reached the crescendo of my narrative, I felt as if the pieces of me that often laid dormant found their rhythm, summoning melancholic memories while dancing joyously with hope. When I finally concluded, the room erupted in applause, a flood of appreciation that momentarily washed away my insecurities. I laughed lightly, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. As Mike approached with a cheeky grin and a mock bow, the ripples of unexpected camaraderie pushed against the boundaries of my initial awkwardness, redefining my perception of myself and the impact I could create. As time passed, the impromptu speech became a topic of light-hearted conversation, an unexpected spark igniting new projects centered on oral histories within our community. I decided to dedicate my weekends to recording interviews with locals, documenting their stories for a collaborative project blending art and history. Reflecting on this experience taught me that sometimes, the greatest opportunities emerge from the most frightening moments, nudging us to grow right through our fears. A final thought lingered in my mind: we all have stories worth telling, ones that shape who we are. A week later, I posted an update on the thread. It had turned out the impromptu speech was merely the beginning of a beautiful venture, and as I felt the warmth of community around me, I knew I had found a piece of myself I had previously overlooked, a reminder that sometimes, the most important stories are our own. A week later, I had posted an update on the thread, sharing how that impromptu speech had turned into so much more than just a fleeting moment of terror. It dawned on me as I sat in my living room, the faint hum of the city outside a comforting backdrop, how that day had been a pebble tossed into the still waters of my life, creating ripples I hadn't anticipated. Initially, when the adrenaline had faded and the laughter of my colleagues had turned into a playful joke, I felt lightheaded, a bit disoriented about what I had opened up to. But with each passing day, the realization of the audience's genuine interest in my experiences began to take root in my mind, pushing me to explore deeper expressions of myself, into the realms of vulnerability I had long buried under layers of caution and self-doubt. So, I started a blog, gradually crafting narratives around the various facets of my life, the heartbreak of my college years, the joy of falling in love, and the quiet pangs of loneliness that sometimes sneaked in even in a crowded room. Those stories transformed, reflecting my sorrow, my laughter, and my fears in a way that felt both cleansing and electrifying, almost as if I were giving them voice for the first time. I shared it with friends, unsure about their reaction, expecting just polite nods and smiles, but instead, I received heartfelt messages of gratitude and appreciation, each one a reminder that we all navigated the same phases of life, sometimes feeling utterly alone. Encouraged, I reached out to an audience wider than my circle of acquaintances. I began to hear echoes of my thoughts and feelings reverberate through the comments and emails that flooded in. Readers shared their own tales, stories tinged with sorrow and redemption, thanking me for speaking out, as if in that open space I had created, they found a platform to unveil their truths. A month later, I hosted an online event titled Tell Your Story, inviting everyone from strangers to friends to step into the virtual spotlight and share. That night, I felt a glaze of contentment wash over me as I listened to voices from all walks of life, each one weaving pieces of their hearts into the fabric of our shared experience. It was a cacophony of human emotion and connection, resembling a melodic symphony wherein each note represented pain, growth, love, and resilience. I had no idea the event would gather hundreds, or that it would light a spark in my heart, a yearning to explore storytelling as both a medium and a means of healing for myself and others. As the sun dipped below the horizon and cast a warm glow through my window, I reflected on how a simple, terrifying moment of being thrown into the spotlight had acted as a catalyst for growth. Crafting my stories felt like stitching together broken pieces of a beautiful quilt, where each patch represented a fragment of experience, an echo of who I was and who I aimed to become. I paraphrased that sentiment in my follow-up post, sharing how the connections I had cultivated opened my eyes to the weight of our stories and how vital they are within this vast universe of forgotten voices. As the comments rolled in, filled with encouragement and resonance, I smiled at my screen, feeling the kinship that came from revealing our raw parts. Reflecting back, I realized how the task of giving an hour-long speech had propelled me forward into a journey rich with discovery, pervaded by the understanding that when we each tell our stories, however trivial they may seem, we breathe life into others, creating a vibrant tapestry of shared human experience. And as I let that thought settle comfortably in my mind, I whispered a quiet promise to myself: I would continue to share, continue to connect, and allow this newfound sense of purpose to blossom into something greater than I could ever fathom at that moment. So, I made it my mission to seek out opportunities to share my experiences, no matter how mundane they might seem on the surface. The following weekend, I found myself at a local community center, where a group of individuals from all walks of life gathered to share their truths. The atmosphere hummed with anticipation, a vibrant tapestry of voices ready to be woven together. I watched as each person stood up, some trembling with nerves, others bursting with energy, and with every story told, I felt a flicker of connection. My own turn approached, and, recalling the buzz of the audience from my first speech, I took a deep breath, recalling the way they leaned in, engaged and willing to absorb what I had to say. When I spoke, it was about vulnerability, the invisible weight it carries, the power in opening up. I shared a poignant memory from my childhood, a time when I had felt out of place and alone at school until, one day, a kindred spirit had approached me. As I recounted how that single act of friendship had turned my world upside down in the best way possible, the room filled with murmurs of recognition and connection. It was then I understood that we all grapple with our own insecurities, grappling silently until someone dares to cut through the noise and reach out. The joy of sharing and the profound weight of connection lingered long after I stepped down from that makeshift stage, and in that moment, I realized that this was the nourishment I had hungered for: validation, compassion, and understanding. Days turned into weeks, and I became a regular at the community center, leading workshops and discussions on storytelling and the power it holds, finding joy in helping others craft their narratives. The feedback was overwhelming, stories flowed like water, and each shared experience seemed to shine a light on hidden corners of our lives we might otherwise carry alone. One evening, we hosted a storytelling night that had drawn in a larger crowd than I had anticipated, a mix of familiar faces and strangers eager to share. I sat back in the corner, a warm glow settling over me, serving as a gentle reminder of how far I had come. The air buzzed with laughter, tears, and gasps, and I listened intently, feeling almost like a proud guardian of this burgeoning community. After the event, I noticed a woman who had been sitting quietly at the back, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. When I approached her, she simply embraced me, and in that moment, I felt the undeniable power of connection, that a few shared words could transcend individual stories and shape something much bigger. A few months later, I received an unexpected message. Someone had suggested I compile the stories I had encountered into a book, separate and distinct narratives that collectively illustrated the breadth of human experience. It felt like an invitation to explore a greater purpose, a chance to preserve the moments that had touched me so deeply. It was daunting, but I took a leap of faith, pouring each tale into my own reflections until they mingled together in a rhythm that felt just right. With every chapter, I penned not just the stories but the threads that pulled our lives together, dissimilar yet intertwined. Finally, the day came when I held the first printed copy in my hands, my heart swelled with pride and vulnerability alike. As I stood at the community center table, selling the book, I was met with enemy fear and familiar joy. To my surprise, familiar faces flooded in, sharing their thoughts about how storytelling had impacted their lives and how my journey had inspired them. I felt a sense of fulfillment wash over me, a quiet recognition tinged with joy. It was no longer just about me. This had grown into an extension of us all, breathing life into the stories that shaped the fabric of our existence. People left with copies in hand and a spark in their eyes, and among them was the woman from that first storytelling night. She approached, her voice soft but resolute. "Thank you for creating this space. Thank you for gathering us." Little did she know how infinitely grateful I felt for that simple moment of acknowledgement. As the months passed and I continued sharing my book, the threads of community solidified, weaving us closer together, transforming strangers into allies, kindred spirits in shared struggles. It became clear how the act of telling stories was nothing less than an invitation to be seen. It was an avenue for us to collectively heal. My initial fears had melted away, giving me the courage to step into vulnerability, and from that, a radiant community emerged, fostering warmth and compassion. It was as if my story had been but a pebble, cast into still water, sending ripples far beyond anything I could have anticipated. There was no final chapter, only an open-ended tale of connection and resilience that carried on, echoing the sentiment I had first encountered, a reminder that we all have stories worth sharing. And as I closed my eyes at night, I let the whispers of those stories settle into my heart, a song of humanity reminding me we were all in this together, forever intertwined in the powerful, beautiful tapestry that is life. There was a small, nondescript bar on the corner of Maple and 6th, a place where the neon lights flickered like a heartbeat, pulsing softly against the darkened streets of the town as if calling out to lost souls seeking refuge from the weight of their lives. I found myself propped up on a weathered stool, staring into a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid swirling like thoughts I couldn't quite grasp. This evening was like many others, where I sought solace in the bottom of a bottle to drown out the disappointments of a life that felt increasingly unremarkable. At 38, the corners of my world had grown narrower, my marriage to Sarah had become a long, quiet sigh we both struggled to stifle, and my once vibrant dreams had dulled to mere memories aching to be revisited. As I took a deep breath, I prepared to face the same unrelenting questions that had haunted me. Was it all worth it? Was leaving the mundane comfort of my life worth the risk of the unknown? That's when I felt a presence beside me, a chill that crawled up my spine like fingers tracing a spine. I turned my head, curiosity overcoming trepidation, and there he was, a man clad in shadows, his eyes the color of storm clouds promising rain, yet oddly calm. He raised an eyebrow and motioned toward my drink. "Finish your drink, it's time to go," he said, his voice smooth yet chilling, reverberating in the air between us like a whisper shared over grave secrets. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to decipher the meaning behind his words. Go where? The question slipped from my lips, laced with disbelief and a hint of defiance. Death didn't saddle up next to a guy like me at a bar, at least, not in any way I had ever envisioned. As the seconds melted into each other, I felt an odd mixture of fear and resignation drown my thoughts. Here was a moment where the certainty of life clashed with the enticing promise of an escape that the impossible had never offered. I had spent so much time contemplating what lay on the other side of living, now confronted by a figure that embodied it, I felt every uncertainty crash against that newfound realization. "I've seen what awaits you," he said, his voice low, betraying no emotion. "Not just the end, but everything that stands before it and the lives entwined with yours. Their sorrow, their hope, the way they'd miss you." I felt an ache in my chest, a desperation to cling to the threads of life I had thus far taken for granted. Memories of Sarah flashed in my mind, the way her laughter would echo like silver bells around our home, the taste of her kisses that lingered long after they faded, the warmth of her hand in mine during quiet moments that no longer held the same weight. And yet, like all things, they felt dimmed against the gravity of this moment. "And what if I don't want to go?" I asked, my voice trembling, a mixture of defiance and fear. "What if I have more to give?" The man beside me regarded me quietly, a flicker of something, a tinge of understanding, crossing his stormy gaze. "Your choice. Life has always been about choices. But you must ask yourself, are you really living? Or merely existing?" The question hung in the air, heavy and imbued with a challenge I hadn't considered until that moment. My thoughts spiraled to the realities that awaited me, the stagnant evenings spent binge-watching shows instead of sharing stories with Sarah, the hours clocked in at a job that drained the very vitality from my bones, leaving me little but a shadow at home. I thought of the dreams tucked away in boxes, gathering dust like forgotten photographs, my passion for painting, my desire to travel the world, to truly embrace every single heartbeat of this existence. The revelation hit me, perhaps I owed it not just to myself, but to Sarah, to remind us both of the vibrancy life could still offer, not the sunset but the dawn ripe with possibilities. The unexpected realization emerged slowly, rising like a phoenix from the ashes of dread. "What if I want to stay?" I heard myself say, a strange mix of determination and vulnerability. "What if I want to make things right?" At that, the man gave a nod, his demeanor calm yet penetrating. "Then you know what you must do. Sometimes, it isn't about the moments we fear but the ones we choose to embrace." With that, he faded, slipping into the shadows, leaving me alone at the bar, a glass half full in my trembling hand. There was clarity in that final encounter, a spark igniting the shadows of my mind. After that night, I began to reclaim my life, painting again, pursuing dreams once abandoned, breathing new life into the stagnant corners of my marriage. When I returned home that night, I found Sarah still awake, her silhouette soft against the backdrop of moonlit curtains. I shared my journey, the encounter haunting yet liberating, and as we embraced, I felt the heavy chains of complacency start to melt away. In those quiet hours, laughter returned, filling the void that had stretched between us like an endless chasm. I learned how making the choice to move forward and not retreat could turn each drink into a toast, a celebration for life over death, for existence over mere living. As for the question of what lay beyond, I knew it was a mystery I'd unravel one day, but not today. Today, I chose to savor the now. Update: it's been 6 months since that night at the bar, and since then, I've embraced change with open arms. Our home now resonates with laughter, spontaneous trips, and color splashed across canvases. Just last week, Sarah and I took a long weekend trip to the coast, something we talked about but had never done, and I created a piece that conveys the essence of that experience. I think I finally understand what the cloaked man meant about truly living. It's great to feel vibrant again. Life's too short to simply wait for fate to intervene. Sometimes, you must take the reins and weave your own fate. As I sit here, reflecting on the changes that have blossomed in what once felt like a monochrome existence, I can't help but marvel at how far I've come since that fateful encounter with death at the bar. It sounds surreal, almost like the plot of some fantastical novel, but there's a stark clarity in my memories that elevates them from a mere heady swirl of emotion into something profound and tangible. The moments Sarah and I have shared recently shimmer with a new light, each laugh and whispered secret a brushstroke on the canvas of my transformed life. The weekend at the coast was a revelation. We drove along the winding roads, the salty breeze playfully tugging at our hair as waves crashed rhythmically against the shore. Standing before the vastness of the ocean, I felt both small and infinitely alive, just like that feeling described in cheesy motivational quotes I used to roll my eyes at. As I took my first deep, salty breath, I closed my eyes and let the sound of the water drown out my nervous thoughts. It reminded me that potential and possibility are infinite, much like the horizon stretching ahead of us. Later, as the sun dipped into the ocean, I set up my easel in the sand, each brushstroke representing an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. The vibrant blues, fiery oranges, and soft purples mirrored the effervescent quality of that sunset, capturing a moment that felt both transient and eternal. Sarah joined me, sitting cross-legged next to me on the cool sand. Her keen eyes flickered from my canvas to the horizon as we talked about everything and nothing, feeling entirely at home in our shared vulnerability, and in that moment, I felt a swell of gratitude wash over me. But the growth hasn't been without its challenges. With every exhilarating moment came a reminder of the past I lived so desperately to escape. There were times when I'd turned to my old habits, workaholism and perfectionism, and moments when silence filled the air as we grappled with unspoken fears. I realized the journey was not just about living vividly but about confronting the shadows that had trailed me during those monotonous years. It was an intricate dance of light and dark, one deserving of exploration. And just as I was understanding the nuances of this duality, the idea of death became more of an abstract companion rather than a menacing specter. It turned into a guiding force whispering encouragement rather than demanding presence. One evening, while painting a tribute to our travels, I paused, letting the brush hover above the canvas as Sarah stepped outside to grab us coffee. I could feel death sitting at the edge of my mind, reminding me of the fleeting nature of these moments. Would the vibrant colors I splashed on the canvas fade as the years rolled on? Would they hold the memories locked within, shimmering brightly or dulled by the passage of time? That's when it hit me. It is the act of creation, the love I imbued into each stroke, that lends permanence to these experiences. I don't need to fear death if I live authentically. I can delve deep into the wellspring of life until it overflows, mingling with the colors of those fleeting moments. Sarah returned then, humming softly to herself, and just the sight of her sparked an uncontainable joy within me. I set the brush down and took a moment to hold her gaze, to bask in the warmth of our shared space. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice soothing yet curious. I smiled, the words tumbling out unfiltered. "What if I painted a mural in our living room, something that captures all the laughter, all the moments, us?" Her eyes lit up, and in that instant, I recognized a shared understanding. We were both co-creating a life of vivid colors, resplendent with the laughter of our now and the hope for our tomorrow. So, here I am now, as I write this, in our sun-drenched living room, surrounded by swathes of color, feeling the pulse of life surging through me like a melody. We're gearing up for our next adventure, a spontaneous plan to explore the mountains, where I hope to capture the majesty of life interwoven with stillness, and perhaps I'll paint another breath of existence onto canvas. Life, I have learned, isn't meant to be a series of what-ifs or if-onlys, it's a series of let's-goes constructed from moments of pure, unabashed joy. And as for death? Oh, it still sits at the bar, ever watchful, but now, I find a certain comfort in glancing over occasionally, raising my glass in a silent toast, a reminder that it's okay to embrace the ephemeral beauty of life and to live it fully until the time comes to hand over the reins. One evening, while I was cleaning up after Sarah had made a delicious dinner full of spices and laughter, my phone buzzed on the table. a message from an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. It was a simple text, just a photo of a sunset taken at a remote spot we used to frequent, accompanied by the words, "Remember when we used to chase sunsets? Let's do it again." I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me, mixed with an insatiable urge to reconnect. The tall, warm memories began to coil around me like an old blanket, comfortable yet fragile, reminding me of a time when life felt both simpler and more profound, full of shared dreams and laughter echoing against the backdrop of fading light. I wanted to say yes, to embrace that adventurous spirit I had recently revived, but the reality of everyday life nudged at me like a persistent child eager for attention. The clock ticked steadily, reminding me of responsibilities, of the cozy routine I had built since embracing change. That night, after putting the dishes away, I brought Sarah a fresh cup of herbal tea and shared my thoughts. She listened intently, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Why not?" she said, her enthusiasm infectious. "We can chase sunsets together, just like old times. I've always wanted to take that trip to the mountains, and this seems like the perfect opportunity." Her words ignited a fire within me. It became clear that this was a chance not just to reconnect with my past but also to strengthen my present. The next morning, we planned the trip. Sarah's infectious laughter spurred us on as we sent texts back and forth, packing lists bouncing from my phone to hers. Soon, each task became an excuse to steal glances at one another, relishing the anticipation that built with every fleeting moment. And so, with nothing but the open road before us, a cooler packed with snacks, and art supplies tucked in the trunk, we rolled down the windows, letting the wind embrace us as we left our quaint little town behind in the fading light of day. The mountains rose before us, majestic and commanding, shrouded in lush greens and the promise of undiscovered horizons. That first evening, we stopped at a small clearing, and my heart danced as the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of orange, pink, and deep purple. I grabbed my easel, and in that magnificent moment, I felt alive, brimming with thoughts and colors screaming to be captured. As I painted, Sarah interjected with stories of our youth, tales that had faded into the background but now sprung to life under the twilight sky. She told me of camping trips where we had almost gotten lost, of nights spent under a stretch of stars that felt infinite, and each story layered into my memories like a new brushstroke on canvas. The next days unfolded beautifully, with mornings spent hiking up trails and afternoons weaving through local markets where we tasted fresh berries and artisan cheeses, savoring every bite as though we were indulging in stolen secrets. The world blossomed around us, and soon we came to a makeshift picnic table where we shared our favorite wines, laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. One evening, as dusk draped the landscape, we climbed a small hill and watched the sun make its grand exit, the sky adorned with its glorious palette. It was then that I truly felt the fullness of living. I looked at Sarah, and her face was illuminated by the faint glow of the setting sun, her smile wide and genuine. I felt grateful, vibrating with the realization that every moment we chose to embrace life brought us closer, not just to each other, but to a profound understanding of what it means to willingly embrace the beauty and fragility of existence. Laughing in the glow of the fading day, I confessed, I think I get it now. All those moments we put off because we were just waiting for the right time? Each of those what-ifs wouldn't come close to the actual joys we experience when we say let's go. Her eyes twinkled, mirroring the magnificent stars that had begun to sprinkle the sky. "Let's keep saying let's go then," she responded softly, and in that moment, I realized that the cloaked figure, my constant reminder of mortality, had indeed become a mentor of sorts, urging me on, not with fear, but with the sweet impermanence of life, urging me to make the most of the moments I had. Now, even after returning home, my heart still thrums with an insatiable need for adventure. I often find myself wandering through galleries for inspiration, letting my brushes dance across canvases, each stroke reminding me that while death may sit quietly at the bar, it's not the end but rather a soft invitation to embrace every fleeting breath along the way. And on quiet nights when I can feel the weight of solitude surround me like a gentle blanket, I still raise a glass to that figure in the distance, not out of fear, but in gratitude for the lessons learned. With the canvas of my life now filled with vibrant splashes, I'm ready for every let's go that beckons on the horizon, forever aware but unshackled by the ticking clock. What adventures are waiting just beyond the dusk? I suppose we'll find out together, one beautiful moment at a time. It was a chilly Sunday afternoon, the kind where the fading light seemed to seep through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the living room, and I found myself curled up in my favorite chair with a steaming mug of chamomile tea cradled between my hands. My name is Lucy, and at 32, I have perfected the art of being the family mediator. My brother, Ben, is 4 years younger than me and has always been the golden child, charming, athletic, and now engaged to Tara, a woman who seemed equally perfect on the surface. Lately, however, something about Tara felt off, and on that particular afternoon, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I needed to talk to my mom about it. We settled into our usual routine, chatting about the mundane details of the week, until I finally broached the subject, tentatively mentioning how I had overheard a conversation between Ben and Tara that felt suspicious. It was more about her complications during the pregnancy than anything else, and although I initially brushed it off, the unease had lingered long after. Mom listened intently, her brow furrowing as I recounted the conversation. I wasn't trying to gossip, it was more an attempt to express my concern, to make sense of the tension building in my family. As I spoke, I could see the worry etched on my mother's face, and I almost regretted opening up. What if it upset her or made her doubt her son's judgment? The last thing I wanted was to fracture our family dynamic. But the more I spoke, the more I felt that maybe I wasn't the only one who sensed something amiss. My mom finally took a deep breath, and with an incredulous look, she shared how she too had observed odd behaviors from Tara, especially how she seldom spoke of the baby without a hint of hesitation. My heart raced, teetering on the edge of suspicion. Was it possible that my gut instinct was right? The conversation spiraled, weaving through layers of what-ifs, and soon we were digging into the details of Tara's past, which we had only pieced together from Ben's largely glowing accounts. The discussion fueled a whirlwind of emotions within me. It felt strange to judge someone who was soon to be family, but there was an undeniable tension growing like a shadow over our household. Days passed, and despite my desire to distance myself from the tumultuous thoughts, I found myself contemplating my brother's happiness and sanity. The knowledge of my chat with my mom nagged at me. Was I being the supportive sibling or merely perpetuating family drama? The more I pondered, the heavier the air felt, until one evening, Ben called me unexpectedly. He sounded off, his voice trembled slightly, and his laughter felt forced. The perfect brother had cracked. My stomach twisted, and I listened as he talked about the challenges of impending fatherhood, how Tara's recent erratic behavior was something he was trying to understand. I wanted to scream, "You've got to be careful." But instead, I urged him to lean on me if he ever needed to vent. I realized then how much I cared for him and how reluctant I was to see him hurt, but did that make me an asshole for even discussing my worries with Mom in the first place? In a moment of vulnerability, I decided to confide in Ben about the conversation with Mom. I expected outrage, a defensive posture, but to my surprise, he was quiet, contemplative. He promised to talk things over with Tara. After hanging up, nausea washed over me. Was it right to have stirred this pot, or was I simply being protective? The weight of my choices felt suffocating, and while I hoped it would lead to clarity, I feared the storm it could unleash. Weeks later, something unforeseen happened. Ben called again, but this time his voice was laced with relief. Tara had agreed to family counseling, and during their discussions, it had come out that she had been under immense pressure, family struggles and the overwhelming fears of motherhood were buried deep, and she had masked them behind a facade of happiness. It wasn't deceit, it was pain, and a fear of inadequacy that I had never considered. My heart sank as I realized how misguided my suspicions had been. I had put Tara under the spotlight without truly knowing her story, and now I was left with mixed feelings about the gossip I shared with my mom. What I thought was an innocent conversation had triggered a catalyst for something much deeper. In the end, I breathed a sigh of relief, not just for Ben but for Tara too, who was at last seeking the help she desperately needed. I turned to my mom, who had been waiting anxiously to hear the news, and laughed softly at how quickly things had spiraled out of control. I realized I wasn't an asshole, I was simply human, trying to navigate the chaos of family life. Family dynamics certainly are complicated, filled with emotions that intertwine like vines. As I sipped my tea and reflected on the journey, I felt a sense of calm enveloping me, and I could finally embrace the imperfections that came with love. Maybe it was all just part of the messiness, and I wouldn't shy away from it again. Update: a few months later, Tara invited my mom and me for coffee, and for the first time, I saw a woman who had started to find her footing once again. We talked openly, and I realized the power of vulnerability and healing. This was no longer about suspicion or gossip, it was about connection and understanding. As I sat among family, a newfound sense of openness enveloped me, and I knew we were all moving forward together, one step at a time. The shadows had lifted, revealing a path to a stronger family bond, forged through honesty and love. As the warm sunlight flooded through the cafe window, illuminating the small round table where my mother, Tara, and I couldn't help but think about how far we had all come in just a few short months. The echoes of past gossip and the weight of previous misunderstandings felt like distant memories, replaced instead by the sound of laughter and heartfelt conversation. Tara, once a figure cloaked in suspicion and tension, now radiated a sense of acceptance that I hadn't anticipated. She spoke candidly about her struggles, her voice steady, yet softening with each word, a stark contrast to the defensiveness that had once marked our exchanges. The cafe buzzed with the hum of patrons and the clinking of cups, but in that small bubble of shared vulnerability, it felt as if time had consolidated just for us. I shared my feelings about the turmoil that had erupted within our family, how the whispering fears about her integrity had clouded our judgment, and how difficult it had been to navigate my loyalty to my mother while also grappling with my concerns about Tara's motives. Yet, as we spoke, her eyes shone with a depth of understanding that made me realize she had been fighting her own battles, ones I had overlooked in my eagerness to protect my brother. It dawned on me that the gossip which had initially driven a wedge between us now served as a gateway for true connection, a means through which we could strip away our facades and share our inner truths. At that moment, surrounded by the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the simple delight of a sunlit afternoon, I felt the bonds of family stretching and reshaping. We laughed gently as we reminisced about lighter memories, free from the weight of suspicion, and I could feel an invisible thread weaving us tighter together. My mom, watching this exchange with a quiet smile, seemed relieved to witness the evolution of our dynamic, as if years of tension were finally easing from her shoulders. It was a strange familiarity, one I hadn't realized I missed so deeply, where we could just be ourselves without hidden agendas or whispered worries. As our cups clinked in a toast to new beginnings, I felt a deep-seated hope rise within me. We were healing, yes, but it was more than that. We were rebuilding, a family not just forged from blood, but from shared experiences and a commitment to understanding one another in our most vulnerable states. We talked about future family gatherings and the kids we hoped to have, and for the first time, I envisioned Tara as an aunt, someone my children could look up to. It felt liberating to finally embrace the idea that the bond we were forming could stand resilient, even against the tides of uncertainty we had all faced. The cafe buzz faded into the background as I silently vowed to always prioritize honesty and openness in our conversations moving forward. Little did I know that this meeting was only the beginning of our transformation. As we stood to leave, our spirits lifted, I caught Tara's eye, a shared understanding passing between us that hinted at the shared journey ahead, a commitment to support each other, to embrace our differences, and to keep the channels of communication wide open. Life, with all its complexities, was stretching out before us like an uncharted path, and for the first time, I felt eager rather than apprehensive about the road ahead. What started as mere speculation had blossomed into a deeper narrative of family and resilience, reminding us all of the possibility that lies within trust and vulnerability. With that beautiful thought, I stepped out into the sunlit streets, my heart lighter than it had been in years, feeling as if I had not only gained a second sister-in-law but also a true friend. In the months that followed, conversations flourished, misunderstandings disintegrated, and what we had once regarded as gossip became the foundation upon which we built a family rich in understanding and love. It was in those quiet moments of sharing our lives, our fears, and our dreams that I realized this journey was worth every misstep, every whisper, and every moment I had doubted. Tara had secured her place in our family, and together we forged a connection that was resilient and transformative, one step at a time. However, as life in our family resumed its comfortably chaotic rhythm, a lingering thought occasionally flickered in the back of my mind, resembling a distant chime reminiscence of the earlier unease. I had learned so much from the experience of sharing my doubts and fears with both my mother and Tara, yet the fact that the whispers had once permeated our lives felt like a dark echo, reverberating in corners I couldn't quite reach. Sure, we had emerged from the shadows, but I sensed that the path to unshakable trust in our relationships was still a winding one filled with cobbled stones left over from prior storms. One dusky evening, as I sat curled in my favorite armchair with a mug of chamomile tea in hand, I felt a pang of anxiety pierce through the warm comfort of our newfound familial harmony. I began to wonder, what if Tara's past could come surging back into the spotlight? What if, in our quest for connection, we had overlooked the footprints of doubt that still lingered on the edges of our joy? Those thoughts found their way into our gatherings, muted but present. It was a sort of shadow that crept around the edges of our conversations. Tara remained vibrant and engaged but seemed weary at times, like a flower that flourishes under sunlight, yet sometimes craves rain, anticipating its own inner storms with cautious apprehension. My brother Daniel and Tara had begun planning their wedding, and with every small detail shared in our new group discussions, there was an undercurrent of tension, tugging uncomfortably at my thoughts. Was this a facade? Were they both displaying happiness while secretly struggling? I wanted so badly to trust in what we had cultivated. I felt I owed it to Tara, to Daniel, and to myself, to believe in this fresh start wholeheartedly. Then, one afternoon, as our conversations continued to grow easier with each coffee date and family gathering, my mother called me with an urgency that shattered my calm. "Can you come over? Tara is here, and I think she's having a rough time." The air suddenly thickened around me, tangling my senses into a web of concern and confusion. I hurried over, my heart racing in rhythm with my thoughts. "Please, let this not be a step backward," I prayed silently as I drove through familiar streets now draped with an unease I had hoped was behind us. As I entered the house, I found Tara sitting in the living room, her face obscured by trembling hands, and my mother's eyes bright with unshed tears. Without needing words, I realized that this moment would determine if we could face any wave that life threw our way. Together, we could navigate through the tempestuous waters, or we could allow it to crash over us, unraveling our cherished connection. I settled beside Tara, taking a breath that felt like it carried the weight of my deepest fears. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," I said gently, breaking the suffocating silence. In that moment, I prayed she would see my sincerity reflected in the depths of her own eyes. Slowly, Tara's shuddering breath steadied, and after the longest pause, she began to speak. Her voice trembled as she shared her insecurities, fears about the wedding, and the haunting doubts that echoed from her past. My heart ached to hear her struggles, yet I was grateful to witness her vulnerability. None of us were perfect, after all, and the beautiful tapestry of our lives was made richer by our imperfections. This unforeseen moment of honesty became a turning point. Instead of retreating into doubt, we leaned into our shared experiences, wrapping ourselves in understanding and compassion. The connection we had forged, mingled with the trials we faced, allowed us to weave our stories together tightly, creating not only a supportive circle but a sanctuary where we felt safe enough to wreck the facade of perfect happiness. From that day forward, I understood that our family was not just a collection of individuals expected to shine at all times. We were a constellation of glimmers and shimmers, quirks and quiet battles. With Tara by my side and my mother's unconditional love binding us together, we slowly unveiled each other's fears and dreams, transforming our past shadows into the light of awareness and compassion. I felt a renewed sense of hope fill my heart, reminding me that while the path may be winding, our willingness to be honest and vulnerable was the compass guiding us forward. The journey to healing is never linear, I learned. It's filled with dips and slides, with moments that may pull apart threads only to weave them closer again. Every time we face life's uncertainties together, I found solace in the realization that our love, our family bond, was worth the challenges. Moments of laughter mingled with tears became the framework of what family meant for us. As I reflected on our growth that night, an indelible thought struck me, echoing softly as I gradually drifted off to sleep. Even amidst the fragility of life, the strongest foundations are often built upon the honesty of shared experiences, nourishing the roots of love and friendship that grow resiliently with each passing moment. I never thought I would find myself reflecting deeply on intimacy at this age, but lately, it seems to occupy my thoughts more than I ever anticipated. At 72 years old, I sit at the kitchen table of my modest but cozy home, the sunlight streaming through the window and casting soft patterns on the tablecloth. The faint sound of a grandfather clock ticks in the background, a gentle reminder of time passing in the quiet hours. I've been married to Margaret for nearly 50 years, and while we both have found ways to enjoy each other's company, I can't help but notice the shadows cast by the years. When we first got together, our nights were filled with energy and passion, the kind that fills the air with crackling electricity. I remember how we would sneak kisses in the kitchen while the pasta boiled over, how our laughter would echo in the empty halls after the children were asleep. It felt endless, exhilarating. But now, it often feels like we're going through the motions. Our conversations have shifted from dreams and plans to pragmatic discussions about medications and doctor's appointments, passion replaced with comfort, and yet there's something comforting about that too, isn't there? But last week, something shifted in me, a long-buried curiosity sparked by an unexpected conversation between Margaret and her sister, who was visiting. They laughed easily over shared memories, and I caught snippets of their chat concerning not only their health but also fragments of intimacy. After all these years, I was stunned by their honesty. Something inside me stirred, a faint ember of desire reigniting. After they left, I awkwardly broached the subject with Margaret, our relationship often tending towards old routines and familiar silences when it came to discussing something so personal. Do you think people our age still? Well, you know? I ventured carefully, my cheeks warming as those words stumbled out clumsily. She paused, a glimmer of surprise in her eyes, then smiled softly, her hands resting on her lap. I think they do, if they want to, she replied, her voice quieter than usual. It was a simple answer, but it felt like a doorway opening, revealing uncharted territory. We held a hesitant dialogue peppered with nervous laughter, memories of our youth spilling over into this new understanding that intimacy didn't necessarily dwindle as one aged but transformed in unforeseen ways. However, I still wrestled with doubts. Could I even make her feel desired? Would I even want to? The next evening, as we settled into our familiar nightly routine, I made a bold decision. I lit a few candles and played soft jazz in the background, a scene eerily reminiscent of our early days. Margaret looked at me, a curiosity sparking in her eyes, and it seemed for a moment we were both peering through time, stepping into an era we thought we'd left behind. I took her hand, and together we ventured into a conversation about our fears and desires. I admitted that I sometimes found myself longing for the kinds of intimacy we had before, the laughter, the warmth, the connection. To my surprise, Margaret confided in me that she had felt similarly, that while the days of wild passion might be behind us, she still yearned for closeness, the kind that transcended physicality, running deep as the roots of our long-shared life. In a way, it freed us both. We began exploring what intimacy could look like now. It wasn't always easy, but it became a journey we embarked on together rather than apart, a dance of sorts to rediscover ourselves after years of being swept up in day-to-day life. I learned to appreciate the little moments, the way she looked at me just before bed, the gentle kisses we shared that spoke volumes of the love we felt. Although we might not physically connect the same way anymore, that doesn't diminish our bond. As the months pass, I've found comfort in the quiet intimacy of simply being with her, and it feels like we've woven ourselves closer together than ever before. Sometimes, it feels like the world has a way of nudging us into rediscovery, reminding us that love is a tapestry, one that evolves through experiences and time. In some ways, the conversations we have now feel even richer than they used to, filled with decades of laughter and compromise, lessons learned, and dreams still clinging to the edges of our hearts. And while the journey may not have led us back to the youthful lust of years gone by, it has brought us to a place of tenderness and understanding, one that feels infinitely worthwhile. Update: just last night, Margaret suggested we take a dance class together, something we had always talked about but never got around to in our younger years. As I helped her into her coat, I felt an exhilarating thrill I thought had long faded. A new chapter awaits us both, maybe even more rewarding than we could have ever dreamed, proving that love remains vibrant, even amid life's shadows. As I stood there, feeling the warmth of Margaret's happiness radiating off her, I couldn't help but marvel at how life had a way of circling back, of offering second chances when you least expected them. Dancing had always been a passion of ours, a shared dream we chatted about during late nights with glasses of wine, our young hearts believing we would always have time for it. But as life often does, it weaved in obligations, careers, and family, pushing our whims aside until they became distant echoes. Last night, however, while we sipped chamomile tea at the kitchen table, Margaret's eyes sparkled with a youthful enthusiasm that ignited something deep within me. "Let's finally do it," she said, her voice playful but sincere. I felt a flutter of excitement. Our days were often filled with simple routines, watching the afternoon sun cast golden hues over the garden, tending to our roses, or bickering about the best way to prepare a casserole. But this suggestion felt like an invitation to break free from those small rhythms and embrace something bigger, something alive. The image of us, hand in hand, swaying to music we might not remember but that would surely come rushing back to us, made me suddenly aware of how much I missed that spontaneous spirit. The next day, I found myself standing outside the local dance studio, butterflies fluttering in my stomach as I took in the pastel pink walls, the bright posters of couples turning elegantly under bright lights. I remembered all those times we had pulled each other into our small living room, a dimly lit space where we would crank up the old record player, twirling awkwardly, letting the music lead us into laughter instead of grace. As I stepped inside, the scent of polished wood mixed with faint notes of perfume filled my senses, another layer of nostalgia wrapping around my thoughts. Margaret arrived not long after, a vibrant ensemble of colors that made her stand out amidst the other dancers' muted clothing. Her smile was wide, a mix of pride and a hint of nervousness, and in that moment, I knew we were both stepping into the unknown together. The instructor welcomed us, a kind-hearted woman with hair like spun silver who seemed to dance through the air rather than walk. She made us feel welcomed, helping to ease our nerves, and soon we found ourselves with a few other couples, learning basic steps to a waltz. The music hung in the air, a gentle stream of melodies that caressed our hesitant movements. As we practiced, I felt Margaret's hand clasped tightly around mine, our mismatched rhythm becoming a shared heartbeat. I couldn't help but chuckle at our lack of coordination. It was as if our bodies were reluctant to remember what they once knew so well. But the laughter, the laughter was the best part. Every misstep led to bursts of joy, and each twirl brought us closer together, weaving new memories that felt like ribbons tying our lives in a joyful knot. I noticed Margaret's face bloom under the soft glow of studio lights, her cheeks flushed, not from the exertion but from rediscovering a part of herself that had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. My heart felt light as I watched her revel in the music, her feet moving in sync with mine, even if we fumbled along the way. The shyness we experienced in our earlier years melted away, replaced by an openness to be vulnerable with one another, an understanding that our age brought a kind of freedom we never anticipated. As weeks turned into months, our dance classes became a sanctum for our love. We would practice in the living room, blinds drawn and music loud enough for the neighbors to hear the joyful chaos. We stumbled and laughed our way through steps, finding our flow in the intimate spaces of our home. Each dance became a dialogue, a way to express what we often left unspoken in our day-to-day lives, turning our bodies into the very words we sometimes struggled to articulate. With every spin and every close embrace, I discovered shades of Margaret that I hadn't seen in decades. Her spirit shimmered brighter than the fading daylight that stretched across our living room floor, a reminder of the connection we'd cultivated over the years. It was more than just learning to dance, it was like peeling back layers of time to reveal the vibrant souls we had once been. And so, our dance journey transformed into something deeper, an exploration of intimacy that I hadn't expected at this stage in our lives. One evening, as we swayed in the soft light, Margaret looked up at me with a glimmer in her eye, whispering that this felt just as fulfilling as any passion we had shared in our youth. Her words wrapped around my heart, stirring emotions I hadn't touched in years, illuminating the fact that our journey wasn't just about the steps, it was about learning how to lead and follow together, how to trust each other both on the dance floor and off it. Before our first major performance, an end-of-term showcase where friends and family would watch, we stood backstage, taking a moment to breathe. I felt her hand grasp mine with fierce determination, her eyes locking onto mine as she said, "No matter how it goes tonight, I'm proud of us." I understood then, more than ever, that life, with all its complexities and challenges, had led us here, not to perfection, but to a celebration of love in its purest form. As the music began, we stepped onto that polished floor, dissolving into the flowing rhythm. We weren't just practicing our dance, we were unveiling a new chapter of us, a testament to love that matured like wine, deepening with time. And as I spun her around, the applause enveloped us, an echo not just of our performance but a culmination of a lifetime of love, laughter, and new beginnings that would perhaps last us until the very end. Yet it was that warmth of her hand in mine, the laughter that floated into the air, and the joy of sharing something we had once let slip away that stayed with me, reminding me that growth and love are forever entwined, steadily guiding us even through the shadows. It felt as if the universe had conspired to give us this gift, a gentle nudge that reminded us both that life is a dance, and every step we take, regardless of age, leads us back to the heart of what it means to be truly alive. As the days melted into weeks following that delightful suggestion, I found myself enveloped in a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt since the early days of our relationship. Margaret and I were scheduling our dance classes, those precious hours soon occupying a place on our calendar surrounded by mundane appointments. I chuckled one day as I crossed out a dentist visit and wrote in "Dance with Margaret, 7 p.m., relishing how the very act of arranging our new endeavor felt almost rebellious in its simplicity. Our classes were held at the local community center, a place I had driven past countless times but never thought to enter. The building, once unfamiliar, soon became a sanctuary for our blossoming connection. Walking hand in hand past the classes in session, I marveled at the energy radiating from the younger couples, their laughter mixing with the swish of fabric and the shuffle of shoes against polished floors. Occasionally, Margaret would tease me, claiming I had 2 left feet, but I found joy in the playful banter. Each step, even the ones awkwardly learned, was more than just a movement, it became an opportunity to explore ourselves as partners again. The rhythm of life, the little joys of spinning her around, or catching her gaze as we misstepped, reminded me of the playful dance of our early romance. One quiet Wednesday evening, After a particularly invigorating class, we found ourselves on the center floor, surrounded by soft amber lights and the lingering echoes of music. The instructor had left us to practice on our own, and as the last notes faded away, I pulled Margaret close. I could feel her heartbeat synchronizing with mine. It was as if the world outside had dissolved, leaving just us trapped in our tiny universe. In that embrace, I dared to whisper sweet nothings, my words laden with affection as I praised her grace, her beauty, the way she always managed to make the ordinary feel magical. Her laughter, a soft chime, filled the space and lifted the very essence of what we had fought for over the years. "Can you believe we're doing this?" she mused, her eyes sparkling like the stars we often gazed up at from our porch. In that moment, looking into her eyes, I realized how far we had come from the complacency that once threatened to sway between us like an unwelcome breeze. We were redefining intimacy, not just through touch, but through these shared experiences that united our spirits. As we left that night, the chill of the evening air embraced us, but it was the warmth of her presence that kept the cold at bay. We strolled through the neatly lined streets, our laughter bubbling over like old times, and I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. Each step toward our home became a pathway lined with memories from our past but illuminated by the newfound joys we were crafting together. Weeks turned into months, and our weekly classes turned into a ritual I held dear. I noticed subtle changes blooming in Margaret, as if she carried a light within her that hadn't flickered in years. It was in the way she danced through the kitchen while cooking or how she surprised me with spontaneous hugs filled with a zest for life. One would think that as we passed the threshold of 70, we should be slowing down, but instead, we were speeding towards a vibrancy I never thought possible. We had become fixtures in our dance class, learning the tango and salsa, both of which challenged our bodies but also made us laugh through the awkwardness of it all. Of a Tuesday afternoon, while everyone was out watching the world unfold, we found the courage to enroll ourselves in a local dance competition. I worried about the footwork and whether we would appear ridiculous, but Margaret held my hand and assured me we could tackle anything together. The day of the competition arrived with a flurry of excitement and nerves rippling through the atmosphere. We dressed in our best, Margaret in a flowing dress that twirled like a bloom around her as she moved, and me in a crisp button-up that felt both new yet familiar. Standing back to back beneath a makeshift arch adorned with flowers, I could sense that this event, regardless of the outcome, was a celebration of us, our journey, our resilience, our laughter. When the music started, it was as if we melded into one, our bodies responding together like a perfect melody, pulsating to the rhythm of our hearts. I could see from the corner of my eye the crowd smiling. Younger couples stood in awe while the more seasoned spectators murmured words of encouragement. And in that moment, I realized it wasn't about winning or losing but about reclaiming the thrill of living boldly. By the time we reached the end of our final spin, the applause was a roar, and I caught a glimpse of Margaret's face, her joy radiating like sunlight, proving that aging did not extinguish passion, it enriched it. When the trophies were handed out, our names were called not for first place, but for something even more poignant, the Best Spirit Award. It felt like a gentle affirmation of our efforts rather than a setback, a trophy representing playfulness and the audacity to embrace each moment. As we stood on that stage, side by side surrounded by laughter and clapping, I marveled at how far we had ventured together, from the quiet moments of complacency to this incredible, shared journey enriched by love. In reflection, I realized that life has a way of surprising us, even when shadows loom, and love remains vibrant through tender gestures, adventure, and the willingness to dance cheek to cheek into the unknown. As we sank back into our cozy home that night, warmed by the flicker of candlelight and the weight of our shared experiences, I knew we had only just begun to explore the beautiful dance of love that continues to grow, its rhythm echoing softly through the years, reminding us that every step we take leads us back to the core of what it means to feel alive, together. The sun was dipping below the horizon as I sat on my porch, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands and the gentle rustle of leaves filling the quiet air. It was one of those evenings when the world felt still, a perfect backdrop for the thoughts swirling in my mind about my sister, Kathy, and her unusual fixation on her new child. She had been so ecstatic when she announced her pregnancy, and even now, weeks after little Milo's birth, the whole family was under the spell of this newborn. Everyone, it seemed, except me. As I sipped my tea, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, not with Milo, but with the way Kathy was treating him. The moment I stepped into her house for the first time post-delivery, I was hit with a wave of bizarrely exaggerated decor dedicated to him. Photos plastered across the walls, his name in neon lights above a crib that seemed more like a museum piece than a place for sleeping. It felt less like celebrating a life and more like a personal art installation from Kathy that demanded to reclaim the attention she had always been dependent on. I could recall something each time I visited, the wild comments rolling off her tongue, like how she believed Milo was destined for greatness, as if he were already writing the next great American novel from his crib. Wincing at such pressure woven into a life that was only just beginning, I wondered if anyone else saw the disconnection behind her infatuation. It all came to a head during this one family gathering. The air was thick with a mix of laughter and baby cooing when it slipped out, an offhand remark from me in a moment of terrible impatience. I had meant it lightly, but the words spiraled beyond my control. "Kathy, I know you love him, but I don't think a plastic doll counts as a real baby." Her face had drained of color, and the entire room went silent, eyes darting back and forth between us. I could hardly breathe, the shocking realization of what I had said crashing over me like a wave, and suddenly I was the villain in everyone's tale. Kathy's hands trembled as she held Milo close to her, a line of protectiveness flaring to life. I watched her posture close in, her expression blackening like a storm cloud. "What do you mean, a doll? He's my baby," she retorted, her voice sharp yet fragile, as if the words were made of glass. I stammered a half-hearted apology, fumbling with my thoughts in the face of her hurt. Part of me felt guilty for not taking her obsession seriously, but another part boiled with frustration. I loved her, and I wanted her to step back from this illusion, this almost delusional state she had created around motherhood, a base trust built on the genuine nurturing that true parenting demanded. Over the next couple of weeks, my life became a tangle of texts from family members asking if I was okay, trying to convince me to apologize profusely, or shaming me for my insensitive comment. Meanwhile, Kathy retreated into herself, avoiding me during family dinners, which just made the entire situation more awkward. I couldn't help but feel a swell of loneliness, like a haze settling over me. I kept fixing our broken relationship in my mind, pondering how I could ease her back to reality without jeopardizing our bond. Finally, in a moment of clarity amidst the fog of my anxieties, I sat down with a pen and paper. I wrote Kathy a letter, pouring out my heart in the way I couldn't face her directly. I told her I saw the mother in her, the love she poured into her baby, but that I worried she was losing the chance to be present in Milo's life by creating a world that felt unreal. A few days later, she responded. The letter was heartfelt, thick with emotion, but she'd woven in threads of defensiveness, describing how she felt so much pressure as a new mother to get everything right. I understood then that she wasn't just immersed in an illusion for my sake but for herself, a desperate attempt to claim identity in a role that felt immense and overwhelming. We met afterward at the park, the crisp air bringing fresh hope as I walked alongside her, both of us with our insecurities and tenderness laid bare. I promised to support her, to be there through the chaos and sleepless nights, and as we laughed at the ridiculousness of plastic dolls in the middle of our shared parental journey, I felt the aching distance begin to disappear, with the first baby steps toward reconciliation. "So, was I the asshole?" I asked her gently, needing to know if I had crossed a line too far. She shook her head, her lips curling upwards into a soft smile. "No, just a blunt sister who cares too much." In that moment, the weight I had carried began to lift, crafting an opening through which trust and love could flow again. We didn't have all the answers, but we had each other, real and raw, ready to navigate this strange world of parenting together, one imperfect step at a time. A few months later, reflecting on that night, I found that Kathy had truly embraced the chaotic journey of motherhood. She had filled her home with memories instead of just decorations, and I often caught glimpses of her laughing at some mess Milo had made, remembering how quickly life can be both beautiful and exhausting. It was a reminder of the deeper roots of connection, real or metaphorical, the bond that continued to thrive despite the heated moments, rendering the word asshole a distant afterthought on our shared journey of love. As I settled into bed that evening, I took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of family and the nature of recovery to weave into my dreams, knowing that the true beauty of life lies in our imperfections. The next few days passed in a gentle blur, each moment blending into another like a watercolor painting left out in the rain. My thoughts danced between the sweet laughter of my niece and the shadows of that sharp confrontation with my sister. Sipping coffee in my small kitchen, I let my mind wander as I watched the rain streak against the window, imagining the little milestones I expected Milo to reach. And then, as if the universe cottoned to my neglect and acknowledging the unresolved feelings swirling inside me, my phone buzzed, pulling me back to reality. It was a message from Claire, one of those whimsical updates she loved to send, featuring a video of Milo clutching at a stuffed giraffe while gurgling pleasantly. Despite the swirling conflict that had weighed on my heart, I couldn't help but smile at the sight of him, his innocent joy begging for love and attention. As the days rolled on, I found myself reflecting deeply about what had transpired between my sister and me. It wasn't just her intense love for Milo that prompted the conflict, it was my own feelings of disconnection and discomfort. I hadn't held a baby in years. I had no framework to understand my sister's adoration, which often felt overwhelming in its intensity. Is that why I reacted so harshly? I mused, tracing the lines of the wooden table with my fingers. It was a lesson in empathy, one that demanded from me an exploration beyond the tangible, into the depths of reason and emotion. Face to face with my own vulnerabilities, I understood that I had played the role of the contrarian, perhaps attempting to temper her unyielding praise with my rational skepticism, but in doing so, I had dismissed a fundamental part of her motherhood. Later that week, I decided it was time to extend the olive branch, realizing that this misunderstanding could easily fracture our close-knit bond if left unaddressed. I invited her for a coffee in a cozy cafe perched on the corner of our neighborhood, a spot that held joyful memories of laughter and sisterly connection. As I took a seat at the small round table, my heart fluttered with a mix of remorse and courage. Claire arrived shortly thereafter, her expression betraying a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "Hey," she greeted, her eyes darting before settling on mine. A moment hung heavily between us, as if time itself was hesitating to take the next step. "Hey," I replied, motioning for her to sit. "I wanted to talk, to clear the air." She nodded, her fingers wrapping nervously around her coffee cup. The barista delivered our drinks, breaking the tension momentarily with the scent of fresh espresso and the quiet hum of cups clinking. "I feel like I hurt you when I said that thing about Milo," I began, my voice softer than anticipated as I approached the crux of our dilemma. "I shouldn't have dismissed your love for him. It's real and powerful, and it's something to be celebrated, not questioned." Her brow furrowed in contemplation. "It's just, sometimes, I feel like people don't understand," she finally admitted, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They think because I have a different experience of motherhood, or maybe because I'm a little overprotective, it makes me less valid. I don't want you to see him like that." The air around us lightened. And I felt the walls we had built slowly begin to crumble. My heart ached for the love we shared, but also for the walls we had built in moments of misunderstanding. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Claire. I've been struggling to connect with that part of your life. I just didn't expect the reaction I had," I confessed, a tremor within the lines of my voice. It was almost cathartic to admit that I had been caught off guard by the power of her maternal instinct, and in that breath of honesty, a subtle understanding bloomed between us. She nodded, her once tense posture softening with each word exchanged. As we continued to talk, honesty ricocheting between our hearts, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't anticipated. Sharing our fears, our insecurities as sisters navigated in different realms of life, allowed us to embrace the authenticity of our experience. The conversation drifted toward lighter topics, both of us eventually finding bits of laughter woven back into our dialogue. And right before we parted, Claire leaned over and took my hands in hers, her laughter rolling like waves echoing the warmth we had built back. "Let's schedule a weekend together at my place? I'd love for you to spend time with Milo. I think he'll really enjoy getting to know his amazing aunt." When I returned home, the weight of conflict lifted significantly. I realized I had so much to learn, yet it was wonderful to resonate with the ongoing journey toward understanding. Through my sister's eyes, through her simplest joys, I could find connections twinkling in the small moments, an invitation to a new life cradled not just in love but also in the vulnerability of letting go of what I thought and embracing the reality of what truly is. Some days are beautiful messes, and I knew I had a part to play in coloring those experiences with her, as sisters and as a family. Over the following weeks, I remained intertwined with Claire and Milo's lives more intimately, engaging in every one of their innocent moments with increasing excitement. Eventually, as I lay down each night, I allowed myself moments to reflect on how beautifully tangled our lives had become. Each layer, each moment of honesty, formed an intricate tapestry of connection woven from love, understanding, and acceptance. In those peaceful reflections, intertwined with laughter and the echo of a new understanding, I found the kind of solace I hadn't known I was searching for. The realization dawned upon me as I drifted to sleep that maybe life's imperfections and challenges could incite the most profound connections, and it was those very bonds I'd built with my sister that reminded me of the remarkable tapestry of life we all share, even, and perhaps especially, when we don't fully understand each other. The morning sun broke through the curtains with a gentle glow, nudging me awake to another day intertwined with the realities of sisterhood and the enigmatic world of parenthood. As I rose from my slumber, the aroma of Freshly brewed coffee wafted through the air, beckoning me towards the kitchen where Emma busied herself, cradling Milo with one arm while stirring a pot of oatmeal with the other. The sight was almost cinematic, a perfect blend of chaos and tenderness that defined her new life. I couldn't help but smile, but a familiar twinge of guilt laced my thoughts. The previous day's confrontation hung in the air like an uncomfortable breeze, and I knew we hadn't fully wrapped up our discussion about what it meant to be a mother in her eyes versus mine. Over breakfast, our conversation flowed effortlessly at first, light-hearted remarks exchanged amid spoonfuls of oatmeal and the sporadic gurgle of Milo. But as Emma shared her latest parenting triumphs and trials, I could feel the unsaid words lingering between us, creating an important, yet unspoken, tension. Just as the atmosphere turned fragile, I watched her face transform, suddenly reflecting the worry I had seen only moments before in her laughter. "Do you really believe Milo isn't a real baby?" she asked, her voice hanging between vulnerability and defiance. My heart sank. I had never intended to undermine her journey, but the truth I spoke felt so distant from the love she poured into him. "It's not that he isn't real," I stammered, trying to tread carefully. "It's more about how we perceive these relationships. Your love for him is immeasurable, but I worry about how these expectations affect you." Her brow furrowed, and I could see the storm of emotions brewing just behind her eyes. "You think I'm playing house?" she hissed, each word a sharp shard. I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, my own heart racing as fear knotted my stomach. It was difficult to see my sister hurt, and the distance between our perspectives only widened in that moment. "No, Emma, that's not what I meant at all." My voice softened, the urgency to mend the rift propelling me forward. "I want to celebrate your bond. I see how much you love him, but I also want to make sure you don't find yourself lost in this identity." She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "How can I be lost when I spent years dreaming of moments like these? How can you think I wouldn't know what's real?" There it was, the core of her pain, the feeling of not being understood, not being seen in the half-light of doubt I had cast over her life. I felt a wave of emotion crash over me as I searched for the right words to bridge the chasm. "I'm sorry," I whispered, feeling the sincerity of my apology wash over my words. "I'm afraid of what happens when the novelty fades and how it might feel to confront the reality of parenting. I just want to make sure you're okay." Her silence spoke volumes, a mixture of resentment, understanding, and perhaps a trace of compassion for my misplaced fear. We remained suspended in that moment until slowly, like the dawn creeping through the night, she exhaled deeply. "I appreciate your concern, but I wish you could trust me more. I'm deep in this, and it's beautiful, even if it's messy." Those words etched themselves on my heart, each syllable a reminder of the need for trust amidst uncertainty. With that, the tension began melting away as if the morning sunlight was burning through our darkness. We spent the rest of the day navigating shared moments together, plays with Milo transforming into laughter-filled bursts of joy, the kind only siblings can ignite in each other. As the hours passed, with each silly face made and every coup exchanged, I let go of the need to be right and allowed space for Emma to lead. When evening fell, and the amber dusk settled lazily outside the windows, we curled onto the couch, each cradling Milo, their hearts synchronized in a new rhythm of understanding. I held my breath as she began to sing softly, tapping into that innate bond that tied us together, unearthing things that transcended mere words. I felt a sense of clarity wash over me, reassuring me that the journey we were on was uniquely ours, regardless of how we perceived it. I realized that love exists in its many forms, and in order to embrace that love, we didn't have to understand every facet of it, we simply had to accept it. That night, as I drifted into sleep once more, I felt a deep sense of peace, a profound connection to my sister fortified by our shared vulnerabilities. The beauty of our imperfect lives felt both heavy and light, reminding me that we carry each other as we navigate through the complexities of love and identity. My heart swelled at the thought of the many future moments we would continue to craft together against the backdrop of life's ever-changing tapestry. Although I hadn't found all the answers, I took comfort in knowing that I was never alone on this journey, and perhaps that was what mattered most. No, sleep, all my childhood bedrooms had something in common. Only now that I live alone did I realize what that was. The first time I noticed the peculiar pattern was when I stood in the center of my new apartment, a modest one-bedroom tucked snugly into the heart of the city. It was a place of my own, yet it felt eerily familiar. The walls were painted soft beige, the floor a warm wood, and the gentle hum of the city outside filled the air like a nighttime lullaby. But as I unpacked boxes and hung up my belongings, it struck me, every bedroom I had ever occupied as a child had a specific element that seemed to echo through the years. Each space had a window that faced the exact same direction, southeast. I remember as a kid, lying in bed and staring out at the clouds shifting colors as the sun set, thinking that the universe was painting portraits just for me. However, something darker lurked behind those windows, a feeling that so many moments of joy were teetering on the edge of something menacing. My parents divorced when I was 10, and I began to wonder if perhaps it wasn't just a coincidence. As my mind wandered down those troubled lanes of memory, images flashed through my mind: that old, decrepit house we lived in after the split. The peeling wallpaper, the creaky floorboards, and especially the shadows that danced in the corners whenever the sun dipped low. I could almost hear the whispers in the dark. They became companions during sleepless nights, always promising to help me, while making it clear that their comfort came at a price. With each move to a new bedroom, the shadows seemed to follow me, lurking closer each time. At first, I thought them just figments of my imagination, remnants of childhood fears stemming from my fragmented family life. Now, in my own space at 30, the memory was no longer vague. As I stood by that southeast window, I could feel a chill creeping along my spine, as if I were being beckoned back into the heart of those tales I had tried so desperately to forget. I dismissed it as mere nostalgia, but then came the whisper, just faint enough to trick my mind into believing it was just the wind rustling the trees. "Come play," it said, a sweet lilt that was both inviting and gut-wrenching. My hands trembled as I decided to leave my safe haven for the evening air, hoping some fresh air would ground me. Just outside, the world was alive, families, couples, friends all bridged by laughter as they mingled in the twilight. But even in a crowd, I felt wrapped in a blanket of loneliness. After a few minutes of walking, I turned and headed back to my apartment, to gather my thoughts and clear my head. The whole way home, I noticed those same wild shadows clawing at the edges of my vision, just as they had in my youth, edging closer with every step. Upon entering my small space, the silence suffocated me, every creak of the floorboards echoing in a way that made me feel less alone yet completely abandoned. I walked over to the window, the familiarity wrapping itself around me like an old coat, and realized that I was still that lonely child, trying to make sense of the world while seeking solace in forgotten corners. In an impulsive act, I decided to pull the curtain wide open, letting the moonlight spill into the room. To my shock, my heart raced at a sudden movement outside. The shadows, once whispers in the corners, pooled just beneath the window in unearthly shapes, tantalizing me with nostalgia and secrets I had long ignored. My pulse quickened, and I thought of all the times I had ignored the signs throughout my life, closing the doors on thoughts that summoned dread but also hinted at discovery. In that moment, I felt at the precipice of something monumental, a challenge to confront my past rather than flee from it. But instead of fear, I felt liberating curiosity, inviting those mysteries back into my heart. I placed a hand over the glass, feeling that odd mix of warmth and chill as I whispered softly, "What do you want from me?" The response was a gentle swell, the shadows dancing closer as if inviting me to join them. Here I was, finally ready to embrace all that I had avoided for years. About a week later, as I still sat enveloped by those night whispers, I caught a glimpse of a memory, a dream I used to have of running through an endless field, with children playing and laughing without a care. Those memories shifted like sand in an hourglass, forming new shapes in my mind. I began writing them down, detailing everything, every whisper I heard, every touch I felt in the corners of my rooms, and eventually, the truth emerged. Those shadows, which had once loomed over me as dark memories, were reminders of a childhood filled with magic. I had hidden from my feelings for far too long, but now, I was ready to turn every belief I held about my past upside down. That playful call to come play wasn't about fear. It was about reconnecting with that part of me I had buried under the weight of adult responsibilities and heartache. The closer the shadows danced, the more I saw them as potential and promise rather than threats. And like any good story, the shadows remained ever present, threading the past with my future, allowing me to weave together a narrative that made sense at last. That revelation breathed new life into my heart as I embraced the space I called home, a sanctuary full of the joys I had once known. Yet, as I finally snuffed out the light late one night, I felt a stir of energy, a soft rustling brushed against my skin. Just by following the path back to the shadows of my childhood, I discovered that they weren't gone, they were always there, waiting for me to acknowledge them, ready to share those deep, sweet secrets once again. It turns out, every childhood bedroom could be sanctified in a way if we dared to listen to the stories echoed within them. Update: I've since taken up writing again, turning my childhood tales into stories I share online. The response has been overwhelming. It seems I wasn't the only one who carried these shadows, but I've come to realize that my words breathe life into them. A small community has formed around my confessions, each of us unraveling our own histories and discovering shared experiences in those whispered moments of fear and joy. What I once thought was a burden has now become a gift, a testament to the power of storytelling and the bonds it can forge between those who dare to listen. As I sat in my dimly lit room, the soft hum of my computer the only companion aside from the shadows that danced joyfully along the walls, I began to sift through the memories that had shaped my childhood, memories that were now spilling onto the screen like ink from a well-used pen. With each tap of the keyboard, I felt a comforting release, a connection to those childhood bedrooms that had been more than just spaces where I slept. They were vessels holding pieces of my spirit, echoing with laughter, tears, secrets, and fears. In each one, there was something eerily familiar, a strange presence that, until recently, I hadn't fully acknowledged. My first room in the house on Maple Street had been the brightest, painted a cheerful yellow that caught the morning light just right, but underneath that sunny veneer, I had felt eyes watching me, always lurking in the corners where shadows mingled with stuffed animals and forgotten toys. Then, there was the small bedroom in the apartment my family moved to when I was 8, where in the middle of the night I would hear whispers from the closet, like a conversation between old friends, secrets shared only in the dark. I thought I had simply been imaginative, that I was a child prone to flights of fancy. But as I delved deeper into my past through the stories I shared online, my fellow storytellers confessed similar experiences, echoes of their own childhoods that mirrored mine, all rooted in similar anxieties and lonely nights. It began to dawn on me that perhaps what I perceived as specters of my past were, in fact, manifestations of the fears and growing pains all children experience but often bury as they transition into adulthood. Slowly, this realization morphed into a kind of solidarity among us, a shared space where we could explore our fears without judgment, where vulnerability became our strength. Each story prompted reflections on what those rooms meant to us, not just as childhood havens, but as the first steps into understanding ourselves. I vividly remember one night, typing away late into the serenity of solitude, when a particular message popped up on my screen. It was from a fellow storyteller I had come to admire, someone who wrote with a raw honesty that resonated with me. They spoke of the first time they had seen their own shadow reflecting back at them, a friend who, at first glance, felt like an intruder in their own world. Those words struck a chord. It was as if they had pulled from my own diary. We engaged in a conversation that stretched into the early hours, exploring our connections to those rooms, and the peculiar comfort we derived from the understanding that we were never truly alone, even in our darkest moments. This exchange ignited a spark, pushing me to dig even deeper into my psyche. I began to write not only about fear but also about joy, about the afternoons spent building blanket forts, the discovered wonders of an old book collection, and crayon-scribbled maps of imaginary worlds. I painted my childhood in colors more vibrant than the dismal shadows I had clung to for so long. These explorations led to unexpected revelations, and I started to realize my last bedroom before leaving for college was surrounded by a spectrum of feelings, excitement for the future mixed with anxiety for the unknown. The presence I felt there was different, a comforting whisper reminding me that it was okay to stand on the brink of adulthood and still carry the echoes of childhood behind me. When my stories turned into a kind of catharsis, I knew I had stepped past the threshold of nostalgia and into the realm of acceptance. Writing transformed into an affirmation of who I was and who I was becoming, a journey shared with others facing their own darkness and light. As I closed my laptop one night, I felt a gentle weight lift from my chest, a knowing that those rooms, those intangible specters that had haunted my thoughts for years, were simply parts of my story, pieces of a puzzle that I had now started to reshape. Each echo was no longer a reminder of fear but a testament to my resilience and growth. I felt empowered, not just for myself, but for others who found solace in our shared experiences. It was in this space, I realized, that the shadows didn't just watch, they listened, and with every word we shared, we grew a little lighter, a little braver, and a little more human. I wouldn't trade this journey for anything, and perhaps what I had once feared was not about what watched me, but about what I could accomplish when I allowed my story to take flight, merging memory with creativity, and uncovering the beauty that lived beneath the surface. And as the world outside grew darker, I felt a comforting glow radiating from within, reminding me that perhaps, in every bedroom, past, present, and future, there lives a piece of me, a part of my journey that is always worth sharing. With each tale I wove, I found myself diving deeper into the shadows of my past, peeling back layers I had long buried under a facade of normalcy and routine. I reminisced about the tiny rooms that housed my childhood dreams, the way the yellow wallpaper in my first bedroom seemed to sigh in relief whenever I would tell stories to the pastel stuffed animals that adorned my bed. I would drape my childhood fears over those walls, and in return, they whispered back with every creak of the floorboards and soft rustle of the curtains. As I would often confide in those inanimate listeners, I gradually realized that these stories were as much for them as they were for me, a way to channel my feelings into something tangible. Yet, as an adult, I often felt cut off from that magical space where imagination thrived, especially when overwhelmed by life's relentless grind. But now, in sharing my words online, it felt as though I was invited back into that sacred place, offering not just a glimpse of my heart but an open window for others to peer through and find a reflection of their own experiences. Each post sparked a flurry of comments, confessions from strangers who echoed my childhood fears, narrating their own encounters with flickering shadows and lingering feelings that refused to be silenced. Sometimes they were lighthearted, and sometimes they struck chords that reverberated deep within, each interaction nurturing a community that felt like magic, a comfort I'd long sought. One night, as I sat under the soft light of my desk lamp, tapping away with eager fingers, I came across someone who stood out among the rest, someone named Eli. Eli shared that he lived alone in a small studio apartment, much like mine, and like me, had begun to feel haunted by the echoes of his childhood bedrooms. He spoke of how he had a relentless cycle of dreams, the same dream where he was a child again, lost in his old house, searching for something he could never grasp. His dreams always left him feeling hollow in the morning, soaked in a longing he couldn't articulate. I felt an immediate bond with him, his vulnerability resonated with my own hidden struggles. Without hesitation, I replied, fumbling for the right words to let him know he wasn't alone in this surreal experience. The conversation blossomed, with late-night exchanges that turned into shared late-night writing sessions. We grew closer, our narratives intertwining like vines climbing a forgotten wall, feeding each other's flames of creativity while pulling back the curtain of despair together. But it was one Saturday, while we were video chatting, that Eli revealed something that would change everything. With a trembling voice, he asked if I had ever felt a palpable presence in my childhood homes, something that felt as alive as the stories we shared. I paused, recalling late nights spent laying wide-eyed under the covers, where I felt I was not truly alone, a comforting presence lying just beyond the threshold between sleep and waking. A shiver cascaded through me as I said, yes, watching the flicker of recognition spark in his eyes. He confessed that his dreams often felt less like nightmares and more like invitations, urging him to return to the house he grew up in, a space laden with secrets and whispers. We shared stories of our childhood rooms, Eli's walls plastered with the praises of his ever-watchful parents, mine holding the scars of the imaginary beasts that lurked just out of sight. That night, a thought lingered in the back of my mind, and it took root. The more we talked, I had considered visiting my childhood home, hoping to illuminate the dark corners, not just to confront what lay concealed there, but to embrace the memories I had long deemed burdensome. As I floated the idea to Eli, I was surprised by how fervently he urged me to do so. What if, he said, there's something there waiting for you? Something that could provide answers? After a long drive filled with uncertainty, I arrived beneath the familiar roof that once enveloped my childhood with love and dread. Darkness had settled into the night, casting a thick, oppressive air over the house. Each creak of the wooden floor was a reminder of the secrets it had held for decades. I walked into my old room, small, anachronistic, but powerful in its ability to resonate with the echoes of old laughter and sadness. I spoke aloud, recalling memories with the fervor of someone yearning for connection, thanking the walls for housing my dreams and fears. It was then that I felt a warmth, a flicker in the air, and as I closed my eyes, images flooded my thoughts, moments stitched together in a vibrant tapestry of joy, and a few dark threads of shadowed apprehension. But what struck me most was not the fear, but rather the love I felt for that sacred space, and for every version of myself that had passed through it. I closed my eyes, embracing the poignant tranquility that blanketed the room, and allowed myself to remember the promise I made long ago. I would not let fear constrict my voice. When I opened my eyes again, tears brimming with both sorrow and gratitude flowed down my cheeks. Standing there, I understood that in confronting my past, each bedroom and each story, I had reclaimed my narrative. As I returned to my apartment, fortified by this experience, I sensed the presence of something greater, a palpable connection not just to my own story, but to Eli and our blossoming community, a space where we all chose to share the dreams, fears, and beauty of our pasts. And as I sat to write that night, the glow from my desk lamp a soothing reminder of the warmth we all craved. I knew that every story shared only expanded the reach of our collective imagination. My past wouldn't confine me, it would nourish my creative spirit, urging me to dance with shadows and find the light, to remind all who listen that together we could illuminate the darkness, painting a bridge from our childhoods to the present, a bridge wrapped in the threads of storytelling, making us a little lighter, a little braver, and forever connected. When I first slid into the driver's seat of my Tesla, it felt like the dawn of a new era, not just for me but for how I viewed modern life and technology. I remember the tingling thrill of excitement, the way the soft hum of the electric engine promised a future unshackled from the noise and pollution of the past. My friends ridiculed me then, calling me a tech nerd and mocking my decision to invest in a glorified computer on wheels, but I brushed it off, intoxicated by the sleek design and the allure of sustainability. Over the months, my affinity for the car deepened. I loved the dopamine rush of the instant torque when I pressed the accelerator, the way I could summon my voice assistant to conjure up music, directions, or even a bit of levity from the mundane daily commute. However, everything changed one autumn afternoon when my routine drive home was suddenly interrupted by an unsettling event. Just as I was merging onto the highway, another driver flashed their headlights, gesturing frantically as they maneuvered around me. Confused, I peered into my rearview mirror and saw a family in an old minivan, clearly in distress. My therapy dog, Barkley, who sat beside me with his head resting lazily on my arm, seemed to sense the tension. I slowed down, pulling to the shoulder of the road, my heart racing with a combination of anxiety and curiosity. As I stepped out, the chill of the evening air hit me and I felt the weight of judgment from passing cars, all of them seemingly aware of this strange, spontaneous moment unfolding. The family rushed out of their minivan, a woman in a white blouse and a man with an ashen face, clutching a small child who appeared to be choking. In an instant, every part of me screamed to help. My heart raced as I recalled my first aid training from years ago. With an urgency that drowned my fear, I rushed toward them, my Tesla's sleek lines glimmering in the afternoon sun, a beacon of both technology and newfound responsibility. After a chaotic few minutes, punctuated by the sounds of desperation and gasps for breath, I managed to assist the child, urging them to cough and finally releasing a small object that had lodged in their throat. Relief washed over the family, whose tears now reflected gratitude rather than panic. I could feel their weight lift just as I felt my own pulse calming in the aftershocks of that dangerous moment. But as I turned to return to my car, a thought crept into my mind, knitting itself with fear. Would they see me as just some tech-savvy guy with a fancy car, not a hero, but merely a pawn of materialism? The fear lingered, reminding me of the conversations about the elitism often associated with electric vehicles. I climbed back into my Tesla, feeling not just drained but a little ashamed, questioning the world I inhabited and whether I'd ever truly been one of them, the nice people who drove simple cars, lived simple lives, and were genuinely a part of the community. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling of disconnection as I pulled up online to a popular subreddit, r/AskReddit. I composed a post that translated my turmoil into words, articulating both my pride in my car and my concerns about how it could segregate me from others. After hitting post, I let the debate swirl in my mind while I lay in bed, the glow of my screen illuminating the somber shadows of my room. The responses came flooding in, many sympathized with my plight while others dismissed my feelings as trivial, mere echoes of guilt for disdainful wealth. The engagement tugged on my emotions. Some commenters shared similar experiences, while others recounted how their Teslas had become a symbol of status, painting a picture that was both vibrant and troubling. For the next few weeks, I grappled with the dichotomy between my love for the car and the vision of an isolated future it might represent. It wasn't until an opportunity arose, a local charity organizing an event for underprivileged youth where the community could discuss electric vehicles and how they could benefit everyone, that the fog of confusion began to dissipate. I offered to bring my Tesla, eager to share what drew me to it while also encouraging accessibility and understanding, hoping to bridge that gap I felt separating me from others. And there it was, as kids climbed in and excitedly pushed buttons, their faces lighting up with joy, I witnessed something revealing and profound. It wasn't about the material, it was about sharing experiences, laughter, and connection. As I left the event that evening, the smile on my face mirrored the sunset, a mix of relief and budding hope. I understood then that it wasn't the car that defined me, but the choices I made with it that could reshape my relationship with my community. As for my post on Reddit, I returned to it to share my experience and reflect on how I transformed my initial feelings of isolation into connection. The thread had blossomed with a variety of stories, some filled with heartwarming outcomes, others serving as a reminder that within the vastly sprawling universe of technology, it's our shared humanity that ultimately matters. I realized that despite my car's sleekness and the status it might convey, it was just a vehicle, both literally and metaphorically, for deeper connections, and as the day faded into night, the hum of the electric engine became a melody of promise, one that I eagerly continued to explore with an open heart and mind. As I drove home under the blanket of twilight, the blue glow of the dashboard illuminated my face, casting soft shadows that danced to the hum of the electric motor. I couldn't help but think of all the interactions I had that day, the threads weaving together a tapestry of shared experiences. The stories I had read and those I had bravely shared of my own made me realize that there was more to owning a Tesla than the sleek, cutting-edge technology or the environmental consciousness it represented. It was about the connections I was forging, each encounter igniting a spark of camaraderie that I had previously thought impossible within the isolating confines of technology. I had initially approached the announcement of the salute with a twinge of apprehension. The idea of gathering with hundreds of fellow owners and waving at strangers felt oddly intimidating. Yet, as I parked my car alongside a sea of gleaming Teslas, I felt an unexpected thrill of belonging. Strangers exchanged knowing smiles and nods, acknowledgement of a shared choice that seemed almost sacred. When we all raised our arms in a salute, I felt a swell of joy unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was as if, for just a moment, we transcended the labels we often wore in the wider world, parent, worker, neighbor, and became simply Tesla owners, a tribe bound by our decision to embrace a different future. As I navigated the quiet streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that last evening's gathering had awakened something profound within me. An urge to connect further, to not just speak about my car but to dip my toes into interpersonal relationships, the kind that thrive outside of a screen. I might have started as a lonely owner with ethereal goals of sustainability, but now I felt equipped to invite others into my life, if only for a brief coffee or a chat about shared journeys. I parked my Tesla in the garage, still reverberating with the energy of the day, and could almost hear the echoes of laughter and stories traded among friends. I picked up my phone, and for the first time, I didn't see it as an intrusive device but rather as a window to my next potential connection. Scrolling through the recent threads, I stumbled upon a post asking for recommendations for local meetups for Tesla owners. A small grin tugged at my lips, and within moments I had commented with my interest and an invitation for a casual coffee outing at a nearby cafe. My heart raced at the thought of opening my life a little wider, allowing new friendships to blossom, just like the evening salutes had ignited camaraderie among us stranger drivers. That night, the potential of connection sparked hope within me, a realization that, perhaps, the salute was not merely a gesture but a beacon guiding me toward a community I hadn't known I craved. I happily fell asleep, dreaming not of electric highways or future innovations, but of the laughter I might soon share with newfound companions, each one fueling the promise of tomorrow's conversations. Update: a week later, I found myself sitting in that very cafe, surrounded by the soft murmur of laughter and conversations just like the ones I'd read about. Each person brought their own story. One had converted their garage into a workshop for DIY electric projects, another was an artist who used solar panels for her studio. As I laughed and shared my own experiences, I realized that each individual's narrative intertwined with mine, forming an unbreakable bond. My Tesla, it turned out, had become more than just a mode of transport. It had become the vessel that carried me toward genuine human connection. I understood now that it wasn't just about the type of car I owned, it was about the paths that unfolded from that ownership, paths leading to friendship, laughter, and the kind of warmth that can only come from moments spent in shared company. The threads we create around us, stitched together by our hopes and shared experiences, are what truly drive us forward, electric or not. And in that bubbling cafe, amid conversations that sparked and flew through the air, I felt anchored and finally at home. As I sat there, nursing my lukewarm coffee and watching the world outside the large windows of the cafe, I couldn't help but be captivated by the sight of families and friends drifting in and out, their laughter mingling with the notes of a gentle piano that seemed to fill the air with warmth. Each car that passed, along with their unique stories and journeys, reminded me of the conversations I had shared online, the kind that made me realize being a Tesla owner was less about the car itself and more about the community it unwittingly introduced me to. Turning my gaze back to the table, I noticed my phone buzz softly, drawing me back into the digital space that had sparked all this. It was a response to my thread. A fellow Tesla owner, Sarah, had shared a particularly poignant story about the emotional journey she underwent after she lost her job. She had taken solace in her daily drives, using her vehicle as a place to contemplate and process her feelings. Inspired by her bravery, I typed back, sharing my own transition from feeling isolated to finding solace in shared experiences, and how the little gatherings had transformed me from a passive commuter to an active participant in my own life. With every keystroke, I could feel the connection strengthening. It was almost palpable, like an electric charge bridging the distance between us. As the cafe lights dimmed, an inviting glow filled the room, and the conversations faded into a soft murmur around me, I suddenly thought of hosting a small gathering of my own. With a tentative excitement swelling within, I imagined a place where the stories of Tesla owners could come together, in the backyard of my own home, perhaps, surrounded by flickering fairy lights and warm fires where we could share not just our car anecdotes but also our lives. I pictured each person arriving, laughter spilling into the night, each tale weaving into a rich tapestry of our collective experiences, the feeling of community blossoming into something beautifully tangible. That evening, I left the cafe with a spark ignited in my heart, an urge to connect, communicate, and transform my newfound realizations into tangible experiences. At home, I jotted down a list of ideas, snacks, drinks, even a few fun games, or perhaps a shared playlist that could have our glowing electric engines humming along in harmony. And as the night carried on, I felt a wave of calm wash over me. The fear of vulnerability I once harbored began to dissolve, leaving behind only the thrilling possibility of what was to come. Fast forward a few weeks, as I prepared my backyard for the first gathering, I marveled at how a simple thread on Reddit had woven this entire experience together. Friends and acquaintances filled my yard, each with stories to share, shedding light on their journeys, from professional triumphs to personal challenges, all the while embracing the very same car that had once made me feel so isolated. Sitting there with a drink in hand, I looked around at familiar faces and new friends, the barriers that once made me hesitant now replaced with an understanding born from the shared experience of our rides. I recognized then that my own initial visions of yearning for admiration or status had faded into deeper connections that fed my soul, friendships that pulsated with the heartbeats of authenticity and trust. As the evening air wrapped around us, filled with the warmth of conversation, laughter, and the scent of grilled food wafting into the night, the realization struck me again. It wasn't just a sleek, silent car in the driveway but a vessel guiding me towards an incredible community of souls. In the laughter shared and stories exchanged, I learned that perhaps the journey we embark on isn't solely about the destination or the vehicle we drive, it's about where we choose to steer our lives, recognizing that the true power lies not in the electric hum of technology, but in the profound connections we cultivate with one another as we traverse this beautiful, chaotic road together. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I found a serenity in that moment, a newfound understanding of my place in the world, and I smiled softly, eager for the adventures, both on the road and within this remarkable community, that lay ahead. There's a weight that lingers on my chest, a secret I've carried for far too long, and it all began on that warm summer day when we were kids, bouncing on the old trampoline in my backyard, laughter echoing like music in the air. My childhood friend, Mark, was more than just a companion, he was my partner in crime, the brother I never had, always up for an adventure, even if that often involved the kinds of mischief that led to scoldings from our parents. As we grew up, that bond only deepened, forged in deep conversations, shared dreams, and endless inside jokes. But life has a strange way of pulling people apart. College took Mark to a city far away, and while we stayed in touch, the distance began to change the nature of our relationship. Then came the day I had always longed for, the birth of my son, Ethan. In that moment, a fire ignited in me, an overwhelming urge to pay tribute to the person who had been a cornerstone in my childhood. After much contemplation, I decided to name my son after him, Ethan Mark, a name I believed would honor that friendship. It felt right, a quiet bond woven into the fabric of my being, yet as the months passed, a dread began to swell in the pit of my stomach. Mark had no idea. To him, I simply had a son, and I had neglected to share the truth behind his name, a truth so laced with love and affection that it became suffocating. Every text, every call, felt like a tightrope walk, and I found myself instinctively avoiding any conversation that could lead to the revelation. The guilt gnawed at me, almost as if naming my son after him was a betrayal by keeping it from him, a part of our shared history that I denied. The thought echoed in my mind, and with each passing day, I imagined how Mark would feel upon discovering the truth. Would he be honored, or would he think I was withholding that love? The indecision ate at me mercilessly. One evening, after tucking Ethan into bed, I found myself scrolling through our old photos on my phone, pictures of us laughing, getting muddy in our youth, clutching our ice cream cones like trophies. There it was, a haunting nostalgia that held both beauty and pain, and in that moment, I wondered if I had tarnished that bond I cherished so much. As days turned to weeks, I could feel the pressure build until it snapped one Sunday afternoon while Mark was visiting, sitting on my couch, laughing over tales from our school days as Ethan played in the background, blissfully unaware. When the laughter faded, I felt compelled to confess everything, to claim my vulnerability. "Mark, there is something I need to tell you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He looked apprehensive, those familiar brown eyes squinting with curiosity. I took a deep breath and shared my truth, the name, the reasons behind it, and the selfish fear that held me back. Silence enveloped the room. Time felt heavy as it ticked away, and for a moment, I thought I had ruined everything. Then Mark's smile slowly returned. And tears welled in his eyes as he took my hand. "You've carried this for so long, haven't you? It means the world to me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Relief washed over me in waves, replacing the burden that was once there. In the aftermath of that revelation, we shared stories about what it meant to grow up together and how we would guide our sons into that same reckless joy we had known. I realized that sometimes, the scariest secrets can lead to the biggest breakthroughs, and as Mark hugged Ethan tightly, my heart swelled with comfort, knowing I had shared a piece of our history that would only serve to deepen our bond as friends. As I reflect on that day now, I can say it was a turning point, and while I may have delayed confronting my truth, the love I had for Mark and the silent understanding between us had transcended fear and hesitation. Update: it's been a few months since that day, and I can honestly say that my relationship with Mark has grown even stronger. He has embraced Ethan like a second son, creating new memories that are steeped in love and laughter. We have started a tradition of adventure weekends, where we take our sons to the places we used to explore, and each new adventure is, in its own way, an homage to our past friendship. I've learned that holding on to fear only creates distance, while sharing truth and vulnerability can build bridges. The best part? The other day, I overheard Mark telling Ethan about how special his name is, a legacy that they both now share, something I never realized would bring us even closer. Life has a funny way of working out, doesn't it? Mark and I had found ourselves laughing over memories from our childhood, as we set up camp at the river where we used to fish under the setting sun. The sound of crickets filled the air, weaving an invisible tapestry of nostalgia around us. My heart swelled at the sight of our sons playing nearby, their laughter mingling seamlessly with the sounds of nature. They climbed trees as we had once done, completely lost in their own world of adventure. I couldn't help but marvel at the bond forming not just between our children but between Mark and me as well. Every story I shared with him was tinged with the bright hues of reminiscence, each tale deeper than the last, revealing pieces of my heart I had kept tucked away out of fear. The truth about Ethan's name still lingered in the air, a sweet secret that felt like a warm hug every time I caught a glimpse of Mark's easy smile. As the stars began to twinkle overhead, I took a moment to reflect on the path that had led me here, the countless moments that could have gone differently if fear had held the reins. It wasn't merely a river running alongside our camp, it felt symbolic of the bonds being forged right in front of me, flowing with potential and history all at once. So many years had passed since that fateful moment in high school, the day I knew my best friend was facing more hardships than I could understand, yet I had chosen to remain silent about the pain I felt, the loss of the friendship we once had. But tonight, with the gentle hum of nature all around, I sensed that I was ready to let go of my hesitation. I would tell him the truth about naming Ethan after him, that in the quiet moments of my son's life, I found pieces of Mark's spirit reflected back at me. It was more than just a name, it was a bridge spanning 2 generations, a reminder that love can withstand time, hurt, and misunderstandings. With the night wrapping around us like a cozy blanket, I took a deep breath, the cool night air filling my lungs, and resolved to reveal the heartfelt significance behind Ethan's name before the weekend was over. As I glanced over at Mark, my heart warmed with confidence. I was no longer afraid. That evening, as we sat around the fire, roasting marshmallows under the vast expanse of twinkling stars, I knew the sound of our children's laughter was just the beginning of a new legacy, one built on honesty and acceptance. The stillness surrounding us felt embraced by clarity, the very atmosphere nudged me forward. I marked the moment, relishing the flickering flames, the laughter, and the connection, reminding myself that what could be gained from this truth was far greater than any fear I had harbored. As I prepared to share that piece of my heart, something monumental shifted within me, the realization that having friendships rooted in vulnerability might be one of the truest forms of strength we could carry into the future. With my heart racing but my resolve firm, I waited for the right moment during our adventure weekend, a cozy bonfire under a star-studded sky. Mark was flipping burgers on the grill, the scent merging with the crisp evening air, when I saw the light of curiosity glinting in his eyes. I could feel the warmth of the fire reflecting the warmth of the moment, and it occurred to me that this was the perfect time to tell him. Our sons were wrapped in their own world, gabbing excitedly about their favorite stories and superheroes. I could hear Ethan's contagious laughter, and it pulled my attention back, reminding me of how quickly time had slipped by since Mark and I were kids ourselves, giggling over silly games and hidden treasures in the woods. I took a deep breath, gathering courage stirring within me, and I called Mark over, inviting him to join me at the edge of our gathering. He approached, holding 2 plates piled high with burgers and s'mores, a proud smile lighting his face. Ever feel like the past has a funny way of sticking around? I began, surprised at how easily the words flowed, even with the weight they carried. Mark raised an eyebrow, setting the plates down on the low wooden table as he leaned in closer, genuinely intrigued. "What's stirring in that head of yours?" I chuckled lightly, thankful that laughter had helped to diffuse the air. "It's just. You remember those days we would dream about our futures? Sitting on that rickety old swing set?" Mark's smile widened as nostalgia danced through his eyes, the flickers of the flames reflecting the warmth of those shared memories. "How could I forget? We had it all figured out back then." "Yeah, and we thought we'd name our future kids after each other, right?" The jest hung in the air for a moment, a playful acknowledgement of our childhood innocence, but I wasn't quite ready to lead with humor. "Actually, Mark, I need to tell you something." He tilted his head, curiosity morphing into something deeper, more sincere. "What is it?" "The truth is, I named my son Ethan after you." Saying it out loud felt like exhaling after holding my breath for too long, the words hovering between us, heavy with years of unspoken sentiment. "I wanted to honor that friendship we had, and you have meant so much to me," I admitted, scanning his face for reaction, watching as a mixture of surprise and admiration flickered across it. His gaze softened and then crinkled at the edges, his smile radiating warmth. "Really? That's amazing, I had no idea," he said, seemingly touched. It was as if a secret barrier had shattered between us, bringing forth an unspoken bond that hadn't faded, merely waited for the right moment to reveal itself. My heart swelled, relief coursing through me. We spent a moment in silence, the night wrapping us in its comforting embrace as crickets chirped a soft symphony. "I always felt this connection," Mark continued, and there was resonance in his voice that made me feel seen, understood. It was cathartic. "To think we'd name our sons after each other, what a legacy, right?" In that moment, it felt as if a tapestry of our lives had woven together in the most beautiful way. The laughter of our sons burst through our revelatory bubble, pulling us back into joyful reality, but I felt lighter, unburdened by secrets. The conversation flowed easily after that, as we shared what being fathers had taught us, how our relationships had evolved, and what it meant, beyond mere naming, to keep the spirit of our childhood dreams alive. As the night wore on and the fire dwindled, I realized that our friendship had transformed not just from nostalgia but from honesty and vulnerability, those seemingly simple acts now the very foundation of something enduring, something that would guide our children in their future adventures. As I exchanged stories with Mark, laughing at old memories, I understood that life doesn't always unfold in the straightforward paths we envision. Sometimes it dances around corners filled with uncertainty only to reveal deeper connections than we had dared to believe possible. When the evening finally came to a close, the embers warming our goodbyes, I held on to the moment, knowing that this is what sharing life truly meant. I went home that night feeling grateful, armed with a renewed understanding of friendship and family, and pondering how this legacy of authenticity would ripple through the years ahead. With Ethan asleep in his bed, and dreams whispering promises of adventure, I realized that the future was a blank canvas, and with every moment I shared, I could paint it with love and truth. And at the end of the day, isn't that the greatest adventure of all? There was a time when every evening was filled with laughter and warmth. I would return from work to the delightful scent of a home-cooked meal, the soft glow of candlelight, and my partner Riley, who greeted me with a hug that seemed to melt my stress away. For the first few years of our marriage, we relished our shared passion for cooking, often experimenting with new recipes or recreating beloved dishes from our childhoods. I was content, and my jeans fit just right, but as life often does, it tilted on its axis. It wasn't an overnight shift, more like a slowly creeping shadow, but over the span of a year, I found myself caught in a web of unexpected challenges. It began with Riley's demanding promotion at work, which came with longer hours and increased stress. I admired their resolve but found myself lonely in the evenings, eating alone more often than not. I'd started to raid the pantry, the fun of cooking fading as every meal alone felt progressively more like a chore. I justified my choices, telling myself it was just a phase, a temporary solace in the constant churn of responsibility. But then came the unwanted comfort of takeout, when all I wanted was to escape the silence of an empty house. A greasy box of fried rice or a cheesy pizza became the remedy, the only companion in my solitude. Strangely, I believe the more I indulged, the more I'd drown out the loneliness. The evenings that once blossomed into intimate dinners turned into binge-watching sessions filled with sugary snacks, deep into the night. I realized I was gaining weight not just from the food itself but from the emotional layers I layered in each slice of pizza or scoop of ice cream, a way of filling the void in my heart. Watching the numbers climb on the scale was sobering yet surreal, like looking at a stranger in the mirror. And yet, when I tried to confide in Riley, worried that my habits were outside the bounds of what we once shared, the truth felt more fragile than ever. They'd flash a quick smile, a fleeting appreciation for my vulnerability, but I could sense an undercurrent of discomfort in their eyes, as if the weight of my struggle only added to theirs. Our conversations turned less frequent, skirting around the budding tension we were both too scared to address. I was caught in a tug-of-war between wanting to reclaim my health and fearing the laughter would fade into something unrecognizable if I laid bare my reality. The sinking feeling in my stomach grew until one evening Riley returned home, their face crumpled with exhaustion from a long day. I had prepared a lavish dinner in a last-ditch effort to recover our connection, but instead of delight, I saw concern flaring in their hazel eyes. They asked gently but deeply, "Are you okay?" I crumbled before them, admitting how I felt engulfed by the weight of my habits, my loneliness, how I felt like I was disappearing into an identity I never intended to embody. The air shifted as if we both let go of our unspoken fears. There were tears and hard truths, but ultimately, we committed to each other to navigate this twisted path together, seeking joy in preparation and balance. In time, we resurrected our kitchen adventures, discovering new recipes that both invigorated our bodies and revived the lightness in our hearts. Neither of us is exactly where we want to be, but we've learned to be patient with ourselves and each other, holding our stories together without judgment, whispering those bittersweet confessions in the quiet of our home, wrapped in warmth and rediscovered laughter. I want to believe that the weight of this journey, both the loss and the gain, will continue to weave lessons that draw us closer. If you've ever wondered how to love during the struggle, look beyond the numbers, my friend, and perhaps you will find the heart of the matter. Update: a few months have passed since that vulnerable night. Our journey took a turn towards wellness, not only physically, but emotionally as well. The weight on the scale has lessened, but what matters more is the weight of connection we've chosen to carry as a team. Riley and I have started to volunteer at a local food bank together every Saturday morning, finding joy in nourishing others while nurturing our relationship. I've learned that each step away from solitude into partnership creates a new recipe for resilience. There's magic in the connection, often unequaled by anything on a plate. If anything, those greasy takeout meals have evolved into afternoons sharing a picnic in the local park, filled with vibrant salads and hearty laughter that echoed into the sky. On those warm Saturday mornings, as the sun spilled golden light over the bustling activity of the food bank, I would often pause amidst the steady rhythm of packing and distributing meals to truly appreciate the moment. Riley and I would work side by side, our hands moving deftly through the boxes of food, exchanging soft smiles and laughter that seemed to wrap around us like a comforting blanket. It was during these hours of service that I discovered a newfound joy. It wasn't just a weekly chore, but a transformative experience that gradually unraveled the tightly wound complexities of the past. Every grain of rice we separated, every can of beans we packed, felt like a step away from the weight I once carried alone. I could see the glint of determination in Riley's eyes, and it ignited a spark within me. This wasn't just about shedding the physical weight I had accumulated but rather about lightening the emotional burden that had followed me for so long. In those reflective moments, I recalled those late nights, trapped in the cycle of mindless eating and isolation, where food served as a reluctant companion during my bouts of loneliness. I had never truly grasped how my relationship with food mirrored my relationship with people. Unable and unwilling to connect, I threw myself into self-indulgence. Yet here we were, Riley's hand brushing against mine as we shared stories of childhood memories tied to family dinners, laughter spilling out like the plentiful boxes of food surrounding us. It was a different kind of feast, sharing our vulnerabilities and dreaming of brighter futures over plates filled not just with vibrant salads but with hope and intention. As summer began to paint the park with lush hues of green, we found ourselves more inclined to leave the comfort of our home-cooked meals behind in favor of leisurely afternoons beneath the rustling trees. There was something so liberating about laying down the picnic blanket and unpacking lunch, free of the stress that once accompanied food. We had taken to experimenting with healthy recipes together, and the process itself became an adventure. We would stroll through the local farmer's market, picking out ripe avocados and fresh herbs, savoring the air laced with the aroma of baked bread and blooming flowers. Our shared experiences began to nourish us in ways I hadn't anticipated. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling week of work for both of us, I felt the familiar pang of anxiety creep in. I had stepped on the scale only to find a number I hadn't seen in a long while, and though I had tried to shake it off, the weight of that digit hung in the air, threatening to overshadow the joy I felt with Riley. I found myself retreating inward, worry spiraling like a whirlpool, and I could sense the change. Riley, ever perceptive, noticed my silence during a picnic, my mind racing with comparisons, doubts, and a precarious sense of failure. "Hey," Riley said softly, pulling a cluster of cherry tomatoes from our spread, "what's going on in that head of yours?" The concern in their voice snapped me back like a rubber band against skin. I hesitated, but the gentle nudging of their understanding eyes coaxed the truth out of me. I stepped on the scale. "I don't know how I feel about it," I whispered, the vulnerability stirring a wave of unease in my chest. To my surprise, Riley didn't dismiss my worry. Instead, they shifted closer, inputting warmth and acceptance into a moment where I might have anticipated judgment. "It's okay to feel that way. But remember the journey we're on. It's not about the numbers. We're doing this together." And in that exchange, something shifted. For the first time, I realized that Riley wasn't just my anchor but my partner. There was an intertwining of our struggles and triumphs that made the journey so much richer. As we shared our fears and insecurities beneath the dappled sunlight, I found comfort in the shared humanity of struggles. Facing the truths laid bare, I understood that weight comes not just from the body but from the emotional baggage that clings to us. With every heartfelt conversation, every laugh shared over a simple meal, we were queuing up all those intricate layers of connection that overshadowed the fleeting discomfort of a number on a scale. As autumn approached, we made it a point to continue our tradition. Every weekend, we would dig deeper into treasured recipes, while each meal crafted blossomed with discovery and meaning. I transitioned to viewing food as a source of connection, establishing routines that nurtured not just our bodies, but also the bonds that fortified our hearts. The idea of weight shifted entirely. It morphed into a celebration of resilience, companionship, and perhaps most importantly, the magic of transformation. An update on our story came when Riley surprised me one early Saturday morning with a phone call. "Hey, I've got an idea that could spice things up for our volunteering." Their voice held excitement, and curiosity swirled within me as I listened. "What if we organized a community cook-off at the food bank? We can involve everyone we've met, share recipes, culture, and celebrate food as we have, but on a larger scale, allowing them a chance to share their stories too." A thrill of ideas cascaded within me. Naturally, I threw myself into the project with gusto, helping to plan out details and gather ingredients. So, when the day finally arrived, a sense of pride bloomed within me as I watched the community come together, laughter echoing in the harvested sunlight, stories flowing as flowingly as the various dishes that filled each table. Riley and I exchanged satisfied glances amidst the fray, our hands gripping tightly as we relished this moment that seemed to signify a milestone in our journey, a festival committed to connection, nurtured through the ingredients of love, support, and resilience. I realized the true measure of weight isn't found on a scale, but in the richness of relationships we foster along the way. It's in the laughter that resonates in our memories and the connections that nourish our deepest selves, an intricate tapestry woven together one experience at a time. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the bustling festival grounds, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the path Riley and I had carved out together. The laughter of children spun joyfully in the air, drifting past the aromatic stalls filled with local produce, arts, and crafts. It was a community united in celebration, where each vendor wore a smile as bright as the colors of their wares. I couldn't help but breathe deeply, taking in the savory scents wafting from the food stalls, barbecue smoke mingling with sweet notes of freshly baked pastries. With every passing moment, I savored not just the comforting flavors that tasted of home, but also the warmth of Riley's hand in mine, our fingers interlaced like the vines wrapping around the nearby oak trees. When we made our way over to a small booth selling homemade jam, the elderly woman behind the counter welcomed us with a twinkling smile. Her hands were calloused yet gentle as she showed us the vibrant labels, each depicting a different fruit imbued with stories of sun-soaked days and summer whispers. "This one's made from the first strawberries of spring," she said, her voice nostalgic as she handed us a small sample. As we tasted the sweet spread, I could see Riley's face light up, and in that moment, I was reminded of how far we had come, how filling our lives with love and connection was beginning to replace the emptiness that once sat heavy in my own heart. After a leisurely stroll through the festival, we settled on a patch of grass beneath a sprawling sycamore tree, its branches offering a comforting canopy. Riley unpacked our homemade picnic, a collection of vibrant salads and hearty sandwiches, all crafted from ingredients we had picked up together at the food bank's community garden. The sun filtered through the leaves, dappled light playing on our faces as we shared bites and stories, laughter spilling between us like an uncontainable river. "You know," Riley began, crossing her legs beneath her, "it's strange to think how food used to connect us in a different way, isn't it? I remember all the late-night takeout and how it was always more about escaping the day than really celebrating anything." I nodded, understanding all too well how those nights were often marked by solitude and the clinking of takeout containers rather than warmth and conversation. "Yeah," I replied softly, "it's almost like we used food to fill the spaces we didn't know how to navigate emotionally." We were both silent for a moment, the hum of festival laughter in the distance grounding us as we processed those feelings. It was liberating to acknowledge our past without letting it define us. Riley reached out and placed her palm on my cheek, bringing my gaze back to her. "But look at us now, creating new memories, giving new meaning to those moments. That's what it's about, right? Learning to nourish ourselves in every sense of the word." Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of hope and determination, emboldening me to step further into this newfound journey with her. With dusk settling in, the festival exploded to life with flickering lights strung across the trees, illuminating the path of laughter and connection all around us. We moved from stall to stall, sharing bites of gourmet grilled cheese and sipping on fresh apple cider as the sky transformed into a canvas of purples and blues. Every moment felt imbued with the lessons we had learned, the importance of of savoring not just food but the quiet magic woven into relationships. And in that bustling atmosphere, it dawned on me just how much I had been missing, how easy it had been to get lost in my own solitude, yet how deeply transformative it was to lay aside old habits and embrace vulnerability. As we leaned against each other on a bench, our bellies full and hearts even fuller, I knew that this was just the beginning. In my heart, I felt a shift, an understanding that life was not just about the meals we shared but also the people who enriched those moments, who brought flavor and vibrancy to the everyday. Our journey together echoed the very essence of a bustling market, a beautiful blend of the familiar and the unexplored, the laughter of a newfound connection taking center stage in our lives. Later, as the sounds of the festival faded and the stars twinkled brightly above, I came to realize that the joy of our partnership would continue to thrive. I turned to Riley. "I can't imagine doing this without you. This feels too right." She smiled, leaning in closer, the warmth of her body providing both comfort and strength as she whispered, "We're in this together, always." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of her words settle in, a vow of sorts, echoing the harmony we had woven into our lives through love, resilience, and the steady rhythm of shared moments. The true measure of weight was indeed not confined to a scale, but rather the delightful burden of connection we carried, woven tightly with each experience we chose to embrace. I never set out to ruin anyone's life, but that fateful night, as I sat in front of my laptop with the dim light flickering against the wall, the temptation loomed larger than life. I found myself staring at my English teacher's online account, the very account that had control over my academic fate. It was the end of my sophomore year, and despite my best efforts, my grades were slipping into territory I never imagined I'd face. There were various factors contributing to my decline. My father's unexpected layoff had thrown my household into chaos, and it felt as if every ounce of stability was crumbling around me. I had always been a diligent student, never once worried about failing. But the thought of ending up with a failing grade in an already difficult subject made my stomach churn. I could picture my parents' disappointment, especially my dad, who had always believed in my potential. He dreamed of me getting into a great college, a dream that now seemed to slip further out of reach. As the pressure mounted, I noticed that my teacher, Miss Collins, had been particularly hard on me lately, marking down my essays for minor mistakes and offering less encouragement than before. It felt personal, and after a disappointing grade on my latest paper, I thought about how futile it was to keep trying. In a moment of frustration, I recalled hearing from a friend about a simple vulnerability in our school's online system that allowed access to faculty accounts. I'd never been the type to break rules, but the idea began to seep into my thoughts, whispering promises of relief. After tossing and turning for days, the doubt turned to resolve. That evening, as I sat down to research how to disable my teacher's account, I felt an odd mixture of excitement and dread coursing through me. It was almost like a game, except the stakes were my future. The process itself was surprisingly straightforward. I kept reminding myself that this wasn't just about my laziness, it was about unfortunate circumstances. With every click, I felt my ethical boundaries shift a little further. Just this once, I whispered to myself, the words barely escaping my lips as I braced for the fallout. It took less than 10 minutes to find the right settings and disable Ms. Collins's account. The immediate rush felt exhilarating, a wildly irresponsible thrill that coursed through me, but that euphoria was quickly dampened by the weight of the decision I had just made. Days passed, and I experienced a strange sense of relief in my classes. I knew my work would go unnoticed, and I could relax without the suffocating fear of failure hanging over my head. But guilt began to gnaw at me. My classmates' confusion when Ms. Collins was absent only added to the tension. They had no idea that I was at the center of it all, the anonymous puppet master pulling strings in the shadows. Each passing day felt like a mini eternity, the relief once felt now shrouded in shame. Driving home from school one day, I caught a glimpse of my father's hopeful face reflecting on the rearview mirror. I couldn't bear the thought of disappointing him, and the guilt continued to twist deeper into my subconscious. As I turned onto our street, an unsettling thought surfaced: what if someone found out? The implications began to feel real as I lay awake at night, replaying the moment of my decision over and over. Had I really thought this through? I felt like I was teetering on the edge of an abyss, ready to fall at any moment. And then, a call came through my phone one afternoon, a notification from the school board announcing Ms. Collins's unexpected absence due to health reasons, a shock that hit me like a punch to the gut. The mutual blame grew across the students, as they speculated on the cause of her absence. It felt like I was walking in a house of cards, and I had just blown a breath of wind that could bring the whole thing crashing down. Eventually, I chose to come clean. Sitting in front of a blank document hours later, I laid out everything: the pressure, the guilt, and most importantly, the fear of failure that had driven my reckless decision. It felt liberating, this carved-out confession, although I still trembled at what could come next. I sent it directly to Ms. Collins's school email, unsure of how she would react but hoping for understanding rather than punishment. A few days later, I received a reply that wasn't quite what I expected. Ms. Collins thanked me for my honesty, acknowledging the pressures students face and promising to support me rather than punish me. That day, I learned an invaluable lesson about integrity, resilience, and the shared burden of expectations. Feeling incredibly relieved, I stepped into my final exams with a motivation I had previously lacked. I didn't get perfect scores, but I didn't fail either. I learned that sometimes, the weight of our decisions can lead to unexpected revelations and growth. Reflecting on that period of my life, I still get chills when I think about how close I came to crossing a line I would never have been able to return from. To this day, I carry that lesson with me: honesty, integrity, and vulnerability can guide us through even the darkest decisions. Update: a few months later, Ms. Collins and I were paired at a school event, and she brought it up with a smile, acknowledging that my story had encouraged her to open conversations about mental health and pressure with her students. It felt surreal to laugh with her about it, and I understood that every choice matters, rippling across our lives in ways we sometimes can't predict. As I stood there, reminiscing about that surreal evening with Ms. Collins at the school event, a comforting warmth washed over me, stitching together the fragmented pieces of a time when my decision felt like a life or death situation. It was hard to believe that only months ago, I was a desperate teenager, standing on the precipice of failure, feeling invisible under the glaring fluorescent lights of a classroom that echoed with tension and judgment. That year had been a turbulent tide of anxiety and overwhelming expectations, where every test felt like an inescapable wave threatening to crash down on me. I remember how Ms. Collins, with her understated elegance and an ever-watchful eye, often noticed the tremors in our voices during presentations or the way we shuffled nervously in our seats during exams. But what struck me most about her was her passion for making the curriculum engaging, using humor and relatable stories to connect with her students. Somehow, this made the pressure feel even heavier. I didn't just want to meet her standards, I wanted to impress her. When I confronted that moment of vulnerability, the line between device and desperation blurred into that fateful choice. Disabling her account felt like both an act of defiance and a moment of deep betrayal. Yet, the weight of my subsequent guilt transformed into lessons I gradually started to share with my peers about honesty and transparency. After the event, our conversation meandered into deeper territories as we both reflected on how life decisions ripple outwards, subtly shaping the landscapes of our lives in ways we seldom acknowledge. Ms. Collins talked about her experiences, her own struggles with balancing expectations and reality, recounting how she had once been a high-achieving student too, feeling the suffocating pressure of attaining perfection. I listened, enraptured, realizing that behind her authoritative presence was a human being grappling with the same battles we all faced. That evening stands out in my memory more for its laughter than its tension. As we navigated the ebb and flow of our conversation, I felt an indescribable bond forming, one that transcended the boundaries of teacher and student. We were fellow travelers on this winding path of life, taking turns to share our stories, really listening to each other. Eventually, as the event wound down and we dispersed into the night, I walked away with a profound sense of closure and clarity about choices, acknowledging that sometimes the darkest moments of our lives don't define us. What truly matters is how we choose to learn from them and connect with others in the aftermath. Reflecting back now, I see how that incident influenced not just Ms. Collins but the entire class. More students began to speak up, sharing their stress and feeling validated in their struggles. It was a ripple effect, her candid acknowledgement empowering others to be open about their mental health challenges. I took pride in knowing my small act of sabotage had inadvertently sparked a larger conversation about self-worth beyond grades, transforming a potentially divisive moment into a collaborative effort to redefine success. As for me, I embraced my initial fear and shifted it into motivation, becoming an advocate within my school for discussions around mental health awareness, learning how to navigate the murky waters of failure alongside determination. I came to realize that growth isn't linear and that sometimes, we stumble into unexpected openings that allow for healing. And as time goes on, I can't help but wonder how many other stories are interwoven with ours, caught in the web of choices, redemption, and connection, forever rippling across the tapestry of our lives. It reminds me that every action, no matter how small, has its role, be it enlightening or obscure, and leaves an imprint on the heart. After all, we're all just trying to find our way, aren't we? Life continued to unfold in unpredictable ways after that fateful encounter with Ms. Collins at the school event. I found myself reflecting not only on my own journey but also on the lives of my classmates, each of us grappling with our own unique pressures. Every conversation seemed to dance with unspoken stories beneath the surface. I would watch as students shared their ambitions and anxieties, forming delicate threads connecting their aspirations, fears, and the instinctual desire to find safety in numbers. We had all learned to wear our facades, often presenting an image of confidence while battling doubts that gnawed at our insides. The pressure to excel remained heavy, cloaking our days like a fog that never fully lifted. Yet, something began to shift in me. As I grew closer to my peers, I learned snippets of their struggles. Some faced obstacles far greater than my fleeting brush with desperation. A classmate of mine, Jake, had been dealing with the ramifications of a home environment suffused with discord. Another, Sarah, was burdened by the weight of her family's expectations, contemplating medical school while harboring a passion for art. These revelations fostered a sense of camaraderie that seemed to weave us together like a vibrant tapestry. I felt compelled to create a safe space where, perhaps for a moment, we could shed our masks and be vulnerable. So, I organized a small gathering at my house one rainy Friday evening, inviting a few close friends over for a night of games and sharing, without the pressure of grades or judgment looming over us. The air was thick with laughter and the rich aroma of popcorn as we played ridiculous party games and debated who would win in a battle between superheroes. But as the night progressed, I steered the conversation to a quieter course, gently encouraging everyone to share something meaningful. Much to my surprise, the mood shifted from playful banter to genuine revelations. Secrets spilled forth like a release valve. I listened to Jake as he recounted moments of feeling trapped at home, how school felt like both a refuge and a battleground. Sarah opened up about the crushing weight of expectations, sharing her dreams of pursuing art that felt so beyond her family's understanding. As I shared my own story, the absurdity and depth of my decision to hack into Ms. Collins' account, the warmth of acceptance settled over us, binding us closer as we embraced each other's truths. That evening felt magical. It was as if we were stitching new seams into our lives, allowing ourselves to be imperfect and whole in the same breath. Days turned into weeks, and our small gatherings morphed into regular meetings, where we'd share laughter intermingled with vulnerability, creating an environment ripe for growth and support. There was something beautifully comforting in knowing that we each held space for one another. Conversations about our dreams and strategies on how to navigate the murky waters of life filled the air, insignificant moments transformed into significant lessons, the ripples of which spread far beyond our cozy circle. The bonds we forged became an unspoken agreement. We would lift each other up through challenges, remind one another that vulnerability is strength, and dissect the chaos of high school together. By the time graduation approached, I could see the change in my friends. Their faces bore a certain glow, a confidence they hadn't possessed before. We were stepping into new chapters, but whatever uncertainties lay ahead, we now had this constellation of support that sparked the courage to tackle life's unpredictability. On the last day of school, standing outside the building one last time, I felt an overwhelming gratitude for the connections we had created. As we hugged, snapped countless pictures, and made promises to stay in touch, I was hit with a profound sense of closure. I knew that the ripples of our choices had tangled beautifully. We were no longer just individuals lost in the struggles of adolescence. We were a group, connected by experiences that molded us into who we had become. In the quiet corners of my mind, I reflected on Ms. Collins and the impact of that one fateful decision. She had not only inspired me to be honest in my struggles but had also unknowingly set off a chain reaction that taught so many of us the value of openness and connection. As we prepared to step into the future, I whispered a silent thank you to the universe for the divine messiness of our intertwining lives and the lessons that inevitably came from forging connections, even in the most unexpected and challenging of circumstances. After all, we're all just navigating uncharted waters, aren't we? I had always been the kind of person who thrived on routine. I woke up every weekday at the same time, enjoyed a cup of coffee while watching the sun rise, and headed to my job as a project manager at a small tech firm. It was steady, predictable, and frankly, comforting. But recently, I found myself on the brink of a significant change. I was about to start my paternity leave. The irony was that I had no child to take leave for. Instead, I had conjured up an elaborate story about impending fatherhood, a tale that began innocently enough but spiraled way beyond my control. You see, I wasn't exactly the confident social butterfly my colleagues believed me to be. I was a 30-something man living alone, with a life filled mostly with work and the solitude of my small apartment. I had always admired the family-oriented lives of my teammates, where evening conversations revolved around children's milestones and playful anecdotes. It seeped into my consciousness, nudging me to share a piece of my future that, while imaginative, didn't actually exist. At a recent office gathering, surrounded by the usual jovial jokes and chatter, I casually dropped the mention of my soon-to-arrive baby. What I intended as a throwaway line turned into a surge of interest and excitement as well-wishers insisted I share updates. The concerning part was that, when I felt compelled to clarify that this was real, I could have easily admitted the truth. Instead, something inside me, a mix of fear and the thrill of being part of something bigger than myself, kept me weaving lies about an unseen little one. I concocted an elaborate backstory, detailing the complex logistics that my partner and I navigated, crafting a perfect facade with every conversation. Yet, as the days passed, the weight of my deception grew unbearable, punctuated by questioning colleagues who eagerly looked forward to my impending fatherhood. Days turned into weeks, and to my horror, paternity leave became more than just a nice gesture from HR, it transformed into a looming obligation. I couldn't face the idea of returning to work after a month and having to explain the absence of a child. What if they expected baby pictures? What if they wanted to meet my partner, the co-parent whose existence I had fabricated? Panic had begun to creep in, fueled by guilt and anxiety. I spent sleepless nights picturing my colleagues' reactions when they discovered that not only was I not becoming a father, but also that I had spun this elaborate tale just to feel included in conversations. I often caught myself staring at the empty nursery I had started to imagine, filled with toys I planned to pick up during my sporadic trips to the store, never bought, never needed. The moment weighed heavily on me. I rode the bus home one evening, feeling a bitter mixture of shame and sadness. Did I really need to create this barrier between me and my colleagues? The truths of my mundane life began to gnaw at me, how I yearned to be one of them, sharing heartfelt parenting tales instead of fading into the background. And just when I thought I might crumble under the pressure of my elaborate deception, something unexpected happened. I overheard a chat at work, two colleagues discussing their own struggles with parenthood. Suddenly, there it was, the relief in knowing that they were facing their own hurdles and not living the seemingly perfect lives I had imagined. Maybe, just maybe, everyone had their battles. That idea sparked a faint glimmer of hope. I finally mustered the courage to confront my lie. The next day, I gathered my closest teammates and, with pounding heart and shaky hands, admitted the truth. I spoke openly about my outrageous tale and laid bare my insecurities. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then laughter erupted, not at my expense, but in solidarity. They shared their own moments of pretending, their struggles with feelings of inadequacy, and suddenly, I felt a weight lift. The fears I thought would alienate me had instead connected me deeper to each of them. Now, here I was on the eve of my supposed paternity leave, without a child but with something much more valuable, a newfound connection and understanding that we all have our unique stories, often woven with threads of self-doubt and longing for belonging. As I prepared to walk into this new chapter of life, I took a deep breath, relieved that, although there might not be a crib to put together, I had certain friends who would share their paths to parenthood with me, and who would support me through my next adventure, whatever that may be. Update: a few weeks after that confession, I received an unexpected surprise. One of my colleagues reached out to me, suggesting we should start a support group for those of us navigating the complexities of adulthood, parenting or not. It felt surreal, and for the first time, I was excited to step outside my routine and forge genuine connections. Helping each other through our different life challenges became a new adventure, turning my fabricated narrative into a meaningful community of shared experiences and understanding. I often reflect on that moment when I faced my truth and how it unfolded into something I never expected, a connection that not only relieved my guilt but also led me into a richer, more fulfilling chapter of life. It was a Friday evening, the kind of evening that drapes the world in a soft, hazy light as day surrenders to dusk. I sat at my kitchen table, swirling a spoon around in an almost empty mug of lukewarm coffee while lost in thought, my mind still buzzing from the recent support group meeting we'd organized. For the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Instead, there was a shared authenticity in the room, a collective understanding that wrapped around me like a warm blanket. The people in that small gathering ranged from new parents overwhelmed by their responsibilities to those not yet ready to embrace the title of adult. Each person brought their own struggles, stories that intertwined in unexpected ways, making me realize no one was truly alone in their fears and uncertainties. I recalled how Janet, a single mother, had shared her battles with anxiety, and Timmy, who was still figuring out college, spoke up about the suffocating pressure to succeed. Each story was a reminder of the fragility and complexity of adulthood, and I found myself nodding along, feeling both their pain and their courage. As the weeks progressed, our group blossomed. What began as a mere flicker of understanding ignited into a vibrant community that met every Thursday evening. Laughter echoed through my living room, mixed with vulnerable confessions and supportive nods. It was heartwarming, and I relished in the sense of community we cultivated. The guilt around my fabricated narrative of impending fatherhood ebbed away, replaced by a profound realization that we were all figuring life out together, and that really, we were all a little lost. I often caught myself smiling during those evenings, and the sound of voices filled with warmth and humor became my favorite backdrop. But I was faced with a new dilemma one night as I was putting together snacks before our meeting. I received a call from my younger sister, Amanda, who had just returned home from a whirlwind trip to Europe. Her excitement was palpable through the phone, but it wasn't long before she veered into more serious territory. Amid her stories about the Eiffel Tower and canals of Venice, she mentioned how she was finally ready to settle down, to talk about the next step in her life, which obviously involves starting a family. The weight of that conversation pressed down on my chest like a heavy stone. I felt a pang of panic surge, the reality of my deception gnawed at my insides. What would she think if she ever found out that I had concocted a tale of impending fatherhood to avoid the pressures surrounding my life choices, especially now that she was ready to embrace that path? Would it all unravel? In a moment of desperation, I decided to confide in Amanda during a quiet moment, carefully weighing my words. I hoped that within my revelation, she would find the humor or lightness to soften the blow. You know, I've been on this wild journey where I've pretended to be something I didn't think I could handle, I began, and she listened intently, her laughter easing the tension in my heart. I told her how raising a child had allowed me to see my own struggles through a different lens, paving the way for connections I never thought I'd cultivate. To my surprise, Amanda found my crafted story amusing and insightful rather than shocking. "It sounds like you're navigating adulthood better than most," she chuckled, "and isn't that what we're all doing anyway? Faking it until we make it?" Her lightheartedness released the tight grasp of anxiety I had been holding on to, and we spent the rest of the evening discussing our dreams and aspirations, not anchored solely on parenthood but rather on the broader realities of life, a tapestry woven with threads of hope, uncertainty, and laughter. With Amanda's unwavering support, I felt a new sense of freedom wash over me, a relief that perhaps my little charade wasn't a shameful secret but rather just one of the many ways we discover our authentic selves through vulnerability. Reflecting on the friendships I had formed, I realized that this journey was less about the lies I had spun and more about the beautiful truths that emerged from them. As I settled into bed later that night, I considered how liberating it felt to embrace honesty not only with others but with myself. No longer would I anchor my identity in fear or pretense. Instead, I would step boldly into the unknown with all its imperfections. And just like that, my life felt whole again, accepting the beauty and chaos in every chapter, connected by the threads of shared humanity. Update: it's been a few months since that conversation with Amanda. Lifelong friendships have flourished, and I've taken an active role in advocating for mental health awareness in our community, inspired by the stories shared in our group. The fear of being exposed as a fake parent is now a distant memory. The narrative I once felt burdened by has transformed into a beacon for others seeking solace in their struggles. This experience opened doors and paved paths for authenticity in my relationships. I've even started volunteering at local youth centers, hoping to share the lessons I've learned in this winding road of adulthood. As for Amanda, she's expecting. Turns out, my penchant for fabricated stories led me and my sister into a new reality, one that's filled with warmth, laughter, and genuine connection. Who knew that embracing the truth about myself could blossom into such sincerities? Life is certainly unpredictable, but I've never felt more ready to embrace it. In the months since I admitted the truth to myself and to Amanda, I've felt an overwhelming sense of purpose settle into my daily life. The support group I started has grown beyond what I originally envisioned. It's become a source of strength not just for me, but for several others who share similar stories of struggle, miscommunication, and the fear of falling short in adulthood. Each meeting feels like a gathering of old friends, people from different walks of life, yet united by a common thread of searching for authenticity in a world that sometimes feels disingenuous. We sit in a cozy circle at the community center, armed with coffee cups that warm our hands and hearts, inviting the soft glow of shared vulnerability. I've learned to listen more than I speak, letting others express their frustrations and triumphs as they navigate the chaotic waters of adult responsibilities and expectations. Amanda's pregnancy has added a delightful twist to it all. The excitement radiating from her is infectious. We often discuss nursery themes and baby names during our group, blurring the lines between support and friendship. It's as though the universe conspired to deepen my connections with those around me, threading their lives into my own, and I've found beauty in the unpredictable nature of it all. I marvel at how life was once about spinning stories and creating facades, and now it is vibrant, full of real conversations and shared laughter. We've even started planning community events, like game nights and potlucks, where each of us can bring something to share: food, tales, laughter, or simply our presence. I remember the palpable tension I felt when I first confessed my lies about impending fatherhood. It was an avalanche of fear and isolation. Yet, here I am, surrounded by people who celebrate honesty in its many forms. We all have our burdens, and together, we lift them slightly, making them easier to carry. One evening, during one of our meetings, a new member shared that they had spent years crafting a seemingly perfect life on social media, only to feel a gnawing emptiness. As she spoke, I could see her raw vulnerability spark something in the others, each person resonating with her words as if they were echoes of their own hidden truths. It struck me then that our meetings had transformed into a sanctuary where we could strip away our facades and embrace our authentic selves, imperfections and all. It was a revelation for many of us, realizing that the messiness of life is actually what makes it beautiful. Soon, I found myself reflecting on my past choices, letting go of the guilt that once anchored me. The lies I told to dodge the harshness of reality had morphed into a transformative pathway, leading me to self-discovery and clarity. I attended workshops on mindfulness, delving into journaling practices, and even explored meditation, learning how to center myself amidst life's storms. It felt surreal to wake up each day, not dreading the mundane, but eagerly anticipating the lessons each moment could present. As Amanda's due date drew nearer, we laughed and planned, aware of the whirlwind to come, but profoundly grateful for the community we had forged amidst the chaos. I often found myself thinking about how life led me here, to this extraordinary confluence of honesty, responsibility, and connection, not despite my earlier fabrications, but because of them. Each day was less about the anxiety of adulthood, and more about celebrating each small victory and communal joy. As I knelt in the nursery one afternoon, painting the walls soft pastel colors, I couldn't help but feel that life's unpredictable nature was not a hindrance, but but rather a tapestry allowing us to weave our shared experiences into something greater. I looked forward to welcoming Amanda's baby into a world filled with love, laughter, and honest engagement. As the figure of a new life loomed near, I recognized that my journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of a newfound adventure, one where every unscripted moment would reveal the beauty and authenticity. And though the unexpected twists and turns would remain part of my life, I now embrace them with a heart ready for what might come next. Confession: I am so desperate to be seen naked, so I go to saunas. It feels strange to admit this, but it's the truth that's been burrowing itself deeper into my mind with each passing day. I grew up feeling invisible, always blending into the wallpaper of my life, and as I moved into adulthood, that sense of anonymity settled uncomfortably within me. I work in a corporate office where everyone wears the same bland suits, and despite my attempts to connect with my coworkers, I often feel like a ghost, drifting through the hallways unnoticed. The idea of being seen, truly seen, without the barrier of clothing, began as a whisper in the back of my mind during one of those long, disheartening days at work. After overhearing a few colleagues share stories about their trips to a local sauna, where they'd experienced an exhilarating sense of liberation, I decided to find a place and give it a try myself. The first time I stepped into the sauna, my heart was racing, not just from the heat enveloping me like a warm blanket, but from the thrill of stepping outside my comfort zone. I had chosen the hour when it's typically quieter, just me and the relief of the steam filling the space, the sound of water softly bubbling in the corner. I cautiously peeled off my towel, each moment feeling like a revelation, as I sat there, the heat seeping into my skin, electrifying my senses. With my eyes closed, I could almost believe I was invisible, like a part of the soothing steam that wrapped around me. The first few visits were largely uneventful, just contemplative time alone in a shared space, but it soon became clear to me that there was tension brewing underneath my seemingly innocent nudity. I realized that what I truly craved was not just the warmth of the sauna but the comfort of being openly vulnerable, stripped of societal expectations and judgments. I watched individuals come and go, their conversations floating around me, laughter spilling over easily, creating an inviting atmosphere that I had never felt before in my corporate life. Then came the turning point, an unexpected encounter with a woman named Elena. She entered one day, radiating confidence and ease, and immediately captured my attention without saying a word. She settled across from me, the soft light reflected in the steam floating around us, and as I caught her gaze, I felt the gravity of my own vulnerability. I longed for her approval, her attention, thinking that perhaps this was what I had been seeking all along, affirmation in the starkness of our nakedness. We shared some small talk, the pleasantries of strangers slowly blossoming into something more intimate over the weeks. With each conversation, I found myself more drawn to her, but also more terrified of the vulnerability I was exposing. My thoughts spiraled, wondering if she saw me as I wished to be seen or simply another body in the steam. The emotional swell of confusion and desire became exhausting. I enjoyed our chats deeply, yet held the shame of my intentions just under the surface, pondering if I was chasing this connection or merely hiding behind my longing for attention. As the weeks rolled on, I noticed that every visit became a mix of dread and excitement. My chest would tighten as I approached the sauna entrance, the prospect of encountering Elena twisting my insides like the steam swirling around me. On one particularly humid afternoon, I took my place beside her, the air charged with unsaid words and unacknowledged feelings, our bodies so close yet worlds apart. There was a fragility in the air, and it struck me then, how desperately I craved to leave my mark on this life, to be more than a nameless figure fading into the background. That day, amidst the soft drumming of my heart and the subtle scent of eucalyptus enveloping us, I confessed to Elena my struggles with invisibility, the anxiety of being overlooked in life, and, most fearfully, my unacknowledged desperation for validation. I spoke with a rawness I hadn't anticipated, spilling my truths like the sweat beading on my skin. To my surprise, Elena didn't recoil. Instead, she shared her own experiences, admitting that she, too, had felt the loneliness of being misunderstood and the joy found in being seen, not only by others but by herself. We talked for hours, our walls melting away along with the sauna's heat, unveiling not just our vulnerability but a meaningful connection that provided solace and strength. In retrospect, I realized that it was never about the nakedness or the sauna itself. It was about the courage to be seen, truly seen, and for once in my life, I felt a spark of clarity. I found freedom in vulnerability, and the comforting notion that seeking connection, while fraught with uncertainty, can yield the most extraordinary transformations. In the days that followed, my visits became less about mere exposure and more about self-acceptance and the burgeoning friendship I had with Elena. No longer was I the desperate individual solely yearning for attention, rather, I embraced my intersectionality of longing and companionship. We continued to meet, spending lazy afternoons wrapped in the comfort of our thoughts, but now, it infused with laughter and a shared understanding. The sauna, once a symbol of my vulnerabilities, had transformed into a sacred space of connection and healing. Update: a few months have passed since those revealing confessions in that steamy sanctuary, and I'm happy to report that Elena and I have grown much closer. We even explored the possibility of a romantic relationship, stepping into a world where intimacy flourishes and being seen as an everyday luxury rather than a rare obligation. I'm still learning to embrace my nakedness, not only in the physical sense but emotionally as well, and I find solace knowing that opening myself up to someone else has yielded greater rewards than I initially sought. The sauna has become our special haven, gradually shifting from a symbol of desperation to one of hope and companionship. It remains a vibrant reminder that the quest to be seen can lead to beautiful connections and unexpected transformations. Looking back over the last few months, I realize how far I've come, how those tense moments spent alone in the sauna have morphed into shared laughter and gentle conversations that flow like the steam that envelops us. Marcus, my newfound companion in this intimate journey, has changed the way I perceive not only my own nakedness but also the vulnerability that comes with allowing someone else into those raw spaces of my life. When we first met, it was just me, sitting quietly, wrapped in the warmth of the cedar walls, eyes closed, my mind wandering to all the causes of my insecurities, the memories of feeling invisible in crowds, of being a spectator in my own life. Then came the day he slid open the heavy door, steam curling into the air like whispers of hidden secrets, and settled down beside me. His presence was unexpected, yet there was a calming assurance in the way he carried himself. We exchanged a few pleasantries, both wrapped in our towels, sharing shy smiles, but there was an undercurrent of drawn tension, the kind that happens when you sense that your life is about to shift in an undeniable way. With each visit, we found ourselves gravitating closer to one another, our separate journeys of discovery weaving a tapestry of shared experiences that grew richer with every passing hour. As the weeks passed, our conversations developed from nervous giggles and banalities into deeper discussions about life, dreams, and fears. I learned that Marcus, too, had been seeking liberation, that he had spent years suffocated by the expectations of others, the weight of carefully constructed facades. Our private sanctuary became a place where the disrobing of clothes was merely the beginning. It was in shedding our emotional armor, the layers of pretense, that we truly began to flourish. In the gentle heat of the sauna, we learned to respect each other's boundaries, to explore the outlines of our souls without rushing into intimacy, allowing the space for trust to develop at its own pace. Once, after a particularly profound conversation, when I spoke about my childhood struggles, Marcus took my hand in his and squeezed it gently, a simple gesture that conveyed understanding more profoundly than words ever could. In those moments, I realized that the desperation I once felt to be seen merely stripped away layers of armor. What I truly craved was connection, understanding, and love in its purest forms. It was during a twilight evening at the sauna, the world outside fading into a whisper of cool air contrasted against the steamy warmth inside, that everything shifted. Surrounded by the musky scent of eucalyptus and soft flickering light, we made a pact, not just for the two of us but also to continue this newfound exploration with others. The brave act of being naked in front of one another became a metaphor for the kind of vulnerability and openness we wanted to cultivate not only in our growing affection but in our interactions with the outside world. Inspired by the freedom we found together, we began inviting others to join us in these discussions, people from our lives who struggled with their own insecurities or simply desired a safe space to explore their personal journeys. Little by little, our sauna transformed from a place of self-sought desperation into a community of sincerity, growth, and acceptance. As we gathered more often, the sound of laughter, shared stories, and the comfort of bare skin against warm wood turned our sanctuary into a fragrant blend of healing and camaraderie. It was intoxicating, watching as people uncovered themselves, both in body and spirit, fighting the urge to conform to societal standards. And within this newly formed tribe, I felt strength swell within me. Each person who walked through the door reinforced my belief that every struggle to be seen, to be understood, was an essential step on the path toward authentic relationships. It felt as if we were reclaiming the narrative of our lives together, each of us no longer afraid to emerge from the shadows into the light of acceptance. And so, as I sit here, reflecting on the journey from volunteering to be vulnerable to creating a safe harbor for others, I've come to realize that sometimes desperation leads us to unexpected places. The quest to be seen has morphed into a brighter vision of companionship, insight, and the realization that we are not meant to navigate these experiences alone. Each of us, stripped bare of judgment and fear, finds that true connection happens not in the obscured corners of our lives but in the shared spaces where our souls can breathe freely. Update: after the last sauna gathering, I've become more adventurous. We decided to organize a weekend retreat dedicated to embracing ourselves wholly, physically and emotionally. I never expected my search for visibility to blossom into this beautiful community. Marcus and I are exploring the next steps of our relationship, and I can genuinely say that I am learning to lift the veil of self-doubt not through sheer will, but through the love and support that surrounds me. Whether we pull it off or not remains to be seen, but if the sauna has taught me anything, it's the power of opening up, letting go, and letting the warmth of camaraderie wrap around you like a cozy embrace. As I stepped into the sauna that evening, a familiar warmth enveloped me, bringing with it an intoxicating mix of steam and laughter. It was a bustling Friday night, which meant the atmosphere was alive with friendly chatter and the soft sounds of splashes from a nearby hot tub. The scent of eucalyptus wafted through the air, mingling with the hint of soft skin meeting wooden benches, making it feel sacred, almost like a sanctuary. I glanced over at Marcus as he entered, his bright smile instantly lifting my spirits. We've come to cherish our time here, not merely as a shared space but as a canvas for our blossoming relationship, one filled with light-hearted conversations and moments of silence that spoke volumes. I was beginning to realize that my craving for being seen wasn't solely about the physical act of bearing myself, it was a deeper yearning for connection, a desire to let people into the raw honesty of who I was beneath those layers of skin and self-perception. As we settled onto the wide bench, I found myself reflecting on a recent conversation. Just the week prior, Amy, one of our more outspoken sauna friends, had playfully nudged me to consider how nakedness could serve as a metaphor for vulnerability, not just the absence of clothes but the shedding of emotional armor. When we strip away our insecurities and let ourselves be authentic, she said, her words dripping with warmth like the condensation on the windows, that's when we truly connect. I felt the gentle stirring of something profound within me as I came to terms with how much I held back for fear of judgment and rejection. I looked at Marcus, seeing the way he spoke with his hands, how his laughter invited me to lose myself in the moment, and I realized he didn't just see my naked body, he appreciated the layers beneath my skin, the quirks and vulnerabilities that made me who I was. As our conversations meandered that night, jumping from the silliness of everyday mishaps to deeper discussions about our childhood dreams, I found myself suspended in a state of blissful existence, fully engaged and present. I had never felt more seen or valued. The sauna, once a space I frequented out of desperation, evolved into a cherished place where affection and honesty flourished, entirely transforming my initial yearning into something profoundly beautiful. Eventually, as the water swirled softly around us, I took a leap into the depths of my thoughts without hesitation. You know, Marcus, I began, my voice a touch steadier than I anticipated, it's funny how this all started as a quest to be seen in a physical sense, but now, it feels like it's grown so much more. He nodded, eyes sparkling in the dappled light, and urged me to continue with a gentle smile, his presence radiating reassurance. I spoke of my evolving relationship with vulnerability, about how I was slowly dismantling the walls I erected around my heart and mind. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what it means to be comfortable in my own skin, not just physically, but emotionally too. The softening of his gaze communicated an understanding far deeper than words could convey. In that cocoon of warmth and acceptance, I felt a piece of my heart unlock, allowing all that I had grappled with to flow freely like the steam around us. Our laughter melded with the soft patter of the water, and under the weight of those shared moments, I began to acknowledge my fears of inadequacy. It felt liberating to confess my doubts, to speak them into existence rather than bottle them up. As the session waned, dipping into the cooler air felt almost shocking, and yet exhilarating. A shared promise hung between us, unsaid yet deeply felt, that we would continue to explore this newfound connection. In that moment, I realized that being seen had transformed from a desperate craving into a warm badge of courage. The sauna had taught me to embrace not just the warmth of physical presence but the raw, tender exposure of the spirit beneath, open, honest, and, above all, human. As we exited, laughter trailing behind us, I understood that true connection thrives not just in being seen, but in being trusted, loved, and cherished for the entirety of who we are. Months have passed since that first fateful leap into a realm of vulnerability, and now, as I reflect on my journey, I feel a sense of profound gratitude wash over me like that soothing sauna steam. Marcus and I have grown closer, delighting in every moment, be it within the warm embrace of the sauna or in our everyday lives, embracing our naked truths together. For those yearning to be seen, I've learned that the warmth of companionship is not found in the act of exposing one's body, but in revealing the colorful tapestry of our souls. Not long ago, I had approached the sauna searching for visibility, yet I now find myself standing on the precipice of belonging, hopeful of the future and eager for each moment yet to come. And with that thought, I know I'm ready to face whatever lies ahead, no longer just desperate to be seen, but content in the love and acceptance that dwells not just in places warm with steam, but in the deep recesses of my heart where understanding intertwines with connection, ready to embrace life in all its beautiful, naked moments. The soft hum of the summer air filled my lungs as I leaned back against my old porch swing, the creaking rhythm calming me, but still the unease twisted like a vine in my stomach. I had always considered myself a peacemaker, the kind of person who would rather diffuse a tense situation than throw a match at it, but here I was, grappling with a decision that felt monumental. My best friend Jenna had been meticulously planning a family vacation for months, a week-long getaway to the coast that she'd promised would be filled with laughter, beach bonfires, and endless sunshine. However, the excitement I felt morphed into something sour when, at a recent gathering, Jenna's brother Alex introduced me to his girlfriend, Tara. From the moment we shook hands, I could tell something was off. Tara had a way of smiling that felt forced, as if she were performing for an audience rather than engaging in a genuine interaction. Still, I brushed off my instincts, telling myself I was being overly sensitive. But it didn't take long for her true demeanor to surface. During a casual conversation with a group of friends, I had made a harmless joke about how I would never be brave enough to go bungee jumping, and Tara laughed a little too loudly, before leaning in and saying, "Well, good thing you're already so grounded, there's no chance of you jumping off anything anytime soon." It was meant to be a quip, but something in her tone pierced deeper into me, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. I chose to ignore it, hoping it was a one-off incident. However, the comments soon escalated into a series of passive-aggressive jabs aimed at my tastes in music and my professional aspirations, each one wrapped in a layer of mockery that left me feeling increasingly small. I knew Tara was Jenna's brother's girlfriend and that I had to play it cool for the sake of everyone else, but when the day came for the beach trip, I felt a seething ball of anxiety lodged in my throat as memories of Tara's comments replayed like a broken record. When I got the message from Jenna, confirming the details of the trip, it struck my mind like a hammer. "You excited for family time?" It read, and my heart sank. How could I possibly enjoy a week in close quarters with someone who belittled me at every turn? Thoughts raced through my head. It seemed so trivial on the surface, but I had always been taught that you should trust your gut, no matter how small the issue may seem. Should I express my concerns, tell her what her brother's girlfriend had done to me? Or would it make me seem overdramatic, an asshole ruining a family vacation? I wrestled with myself throughout the night, tossing and turning until morning brought clarity, not resolution, but clarity. I had to make a choice, either go and endure the taunts or cut my losses and cancel my reservation, which felt like a betrayal against Jenna, who had so eagerly planned this trip. As the sun rose, I decided that I wouldn't attend this trip. I thought about how I deserved to be treated better, that allowing Tara to ruin something I had looked forward to would only deepen my frustration. I sent Jenna a calm and thoughtful message, explaining my feelings and why I felt I could not join them this time around. I poured my heart into those words, conveying that it wasn't her fault, and nothing to do with the family. It was about wanting to protect my own peace. The response came quickly, and my stomach churned as I watched the three little bubbles appear and disappear, Jenna typing and erasing, typing again. Finally, her message arrived, "I'm sorry. I had no idea. Do you want to talk about it?" In that moment, a wave of relief washed over me. I had chosen the right path. We talked later that evening, and I explained my experiences with Tara. Jenna listened patiently, her understanding soothing the wounds of doubt I had bandaged throughout the day. She expressed her apologies for me feeling uncomfortable, assuring me that she would discuss it with Alex, but also emphasized that she knew how hard it was to navigate complicated relationships within families. As we talked, something began to shift in my perspective. Perhaps Jenna wouldn't harbor resentment towards my decision after all, and with that thought came a mix of gratitude and sadness. It felt liberating in a way I hadn't anticipated. We ended our conversation with a casual promise to hang out soon, just the two of us. A few days later, I received a call from Jenna. "You won't believe this," she began with a laugh. After talking to Alex about Tara, he broke up with her. Apparently, she had been treating him that way too. Her voice cracked with laughter, but it wasn't malicious. It was clear Jenna found humor in the situation and validation in my choice to step away. As I hung up, I realized that I hadn't been the asshole I had feared becoming. I had done something brave, established boundaries. Sure, not everyone would understand my decision to skip the trip, but it felt undeniably right. I couldn't help but reflect on how sometimes prioritizing your own well-being could lead to a happier outcome than you'd ever expected, and as I settled back into my swing, the summer air cradled me like an embrace, reminding me that I had made the right choice. My story echoed in the quiet of my thoughts. Speaking up was an act of self-love. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden hues across the sky, I let the stillness of the evening wrap around me like a comforting blanket. The tension from earlier in the week, those heated moments filled with uncertainty and anxiety, slowly began to dissolve into a mere backdrop of distant anxiety, allowing for introspection to take center stage. It was strange how life could shift so abruptly. One moment I was gearing up for what I thought would be a joyful family vacation with friends, and the next, I was choosing personal boundaries over chaotic gatherings that had become tinged with past grievances. I had known Sarah and her family for years. We shared countless gatherings, laughter-filled dinners, and holiday celebrations. Their home was a second family to me, yet the arrival of Jake's girlfriend, Mia, had changed the atmosphere entirely. She was charming enough to sweep her way into their circles, but beneath that veneer, I had sensed a thickness, a harshness I couldn't quite grasp until she unleashed her venomous remarks directly at me. The way she laughed, but not with me, always at my expense, fueling my insecurities to a raging fire, igniting a storm of emotions I felt powerless against. The night I confronted her, my nerves buzzed with anxiety, but a flicker of determination pushed me through. I stood up for myself, only to be met with condescension and mockery, a cacophony that echoed in the corners of my mind long after the conversation ended. The vacation had felt like an ultimatum. Either I pressured myself to endure another week of harassment disguised as humor, or I chose to walk away. But it was more than just a stressful week away. It was a reflection of a greater truth I'd been unwilling to acknowledge until now. I had convinced myself that I was hypersensitive, that maybe my reactions stemmed from personal insecurities rather than a genuine threat to my emotional well-being, but with every snide remark I recalled, I learned that my discomfort was valid. I deserved peace. Settling into my porch swing, the gentle creaking brought my mind back to the fleeting moments of boldness I'd felt when I finally said no. It felt as if a weight had lifted, and I marveled at the idea that sometimes, brave actions can spur waves of change we never expected. The afternoon breeze tangled playfully with my hair, carrying the scent of blooming flowers, and I grinned slightly, realizing that the warmth didn't just come from the setting sun but also from within my heart, a sense of freedom. I was finally free from the expectation that dictated how I should feel or act around people who did not respect me. The sun disappeared, casting the world into a soft twilight, and I settled into the stillness, letting the sounds of the night surround me. A distant thunder roll reminded me that storms could come, whether they were weather-related or within our relationships, and I realized something deeper, that it was okay to sometimes choose the calm solitude over the chaos, even if it meant stepping away from the people I loved. Before I knew it, my mind wandered to the possibility of how Sarah might react. She was the glue of our group, and I worried she would be disappointed or upset that I was skipping out. But what I knew with certainty was that I had put myself first, and for once, the discomfort of saying no transformed into the relief of being true to whom I had become. The night offered a sense of resolution, wrapping me in an almost dreamlike embrace, begging me to turn inward and reflect. I settled deeper into the swing, feeling the rhythm of life around me lull my thoughts into a soft hum. Perhaps tomorrow would bring new revelations and a deeper understanding of how to navigate relationships moving forward. As sleep beckoned, I found solace in the quiet and the decision I had made, a reminder that self-love doesn't just mean indulging in things that make you happy but also means having the courage to say enough is enough. And with that comforting thought in my mind, cradled by the feathery embrace of the summer night, I surrendered to the soft whisper of sleep. The days that followed were a gentle blur, a harmonious blend of quiet moments and the mundane rhythm of daily life. It was remarkable how, with my newfound clarity, even the simplest of routines felt more vibrant. My morning coffee tasted richer, the sunlight pouring through the window seemed warmer, and even my interactions with friends became more fulfilling. I reveled in this feeling, sinking deeper into the comfort of my own company, though a slight twinge of worry tugged at the edges of my contentment. Sure, I had been resolute in my decision to skip the family vacation, but there was a lingering thought that perhaps my friend had seen it as a betrayal rather than a necessary boundary. I could only imagine the conversations that buzzed among her family. They were close-knit, and I knew my choice wouldn't have gone unspoken. As the end of the week approached, I received a message from my friend, a simple "Hey, can we talk?" And I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. It felt as if the air had thickened, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I hesitated, finger hovering over the screen as I contemplated my next move. What could she want to discuss? Would she confront me about my decision, or would she still be understanding? I took a deep breath, recalling the peace of that summer night, reminding myself that I was not only allowed to advocate for my own well-being but that I should cherish my needs in the same way I cherished my friendships. When we finally met up at our usual cafe, the one with the checkered tablecloths that always felt homey despite how tucked away it was from the bustling main street, my heart raced. She was already seated, her brow furrowed as she fiddled with the napkin, and I felt a rush of regret wash over me at the sight of her distress. I slid into the seat across from her, searching her eyes for clues, wanting nothing more than to dissolve the tension that lined the air between us. "Hey," she started, her voice soft yet laced with unease. "I've heard some things." And just like that, I felt my heartbeat quicken. She launched into the conversation, revealing whispers of concern from her family, comments that I was being unreasonable or selfish. Deep down, I expected this kind of fallout. It was a reflection of how affectionately they all seemed to regard one another, but I also found a flicker of disappointment creeping in as she relayed their sentiments. "I just wish you could have talked it out with us, you know? I thought we were on the same team," she murmured, her eyes dim reflecting confusion. In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions surge through me, anger, guilt, and a tinge of sadness. I wanted to lash out, to explain how her brother's girlfriend's behavior had threatened my peace, that my choice wasn't born of spite but of necessity. Yet her hurt was palpable, and I could sense my need to defend myself was clashing with the urge to reassure her. "I understand how it might seem," I began slowly, choosing my words with care. "But I had to protect myself. The way she treated me, it wasn't right. I tried to reach out to you, but every time I did, it felt like there was more tension, and I truly did fear what being around her would mean for me." For a moment, silence fell between us. I watched her shoulders relax slightly as she processed my words, and although I wished desperately for a way to bridge the gap that had formed, I held my breath, hoping that understanding would find its way between us. Eventually, she lifted her gaze, and there was a soft vulnerability in her expression. "I wish you had just told me everything sooner," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "None of us are perfect, and I don't regret wanting to include you. I guess it just hurt hearing you weren't coming along. I'm always grateful for friendships," I thought as we talked, pained in the moment yet intertwined in a kind of healing I hadn't expected. While she didn't outright apologize for her family's words, nor could I expect her to, we both recognized a pathway back to each other, one paved with honesty and understanding. As we navigated through our feelings and learned how to express our vulnerability, I felt the weight begin to lift from my chest, replaced by the flicker of something warm and familiar. We spent the rest of that afternoon laughing over shared memories and even exchanging stories about our most awkward moments. By the time we parted, the tension had dissipated, and we were back on that familiar wavelength, the bond more profound for having tested its limits. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief, like returning home after a long journey, and in my heart, I acknowledged that friendships, like life, would have their peaks and valleys. Weeks later, I received a postcard from their trip. There was my friend's cheerful handwriting, accompanied by a sweet note about the beach days and messy adventures, all punctuated by light-hearted illustrations. As I hung it up on my fridge, right next to the one from my own getaway, I realized the power of choice was a beacon for light in my life. It reminded me that standing up for my well-being didn't just protect me, it encouraged a space for openness and connection. The quiet comfort of being true to myself weaved itself into the friendships I cherished. In the larger narrative of my life, I learned that sometimes the ripples of a choice echo much longer than the initial impact, and the often scarier path of honesty and vulnerability not only nourishes my soul but also elevates the relationships I hold dear. I settled back into my swing one evening as summer whispered its last goodbyes, feeling eternally grateful for the lessons learned, the connections healed, and the quiet strength that grew in the acceptance of my own worth. As I closed my eyes that evening, lulled once more by the familiar sounds of dusk, I realized every step on this journey was but another beautiful stroke on the canvas of my life, colorful, wild, and utterly mine to shape.